Chapter 46-27. The fifth Hall Master and the guards did not dare to imagine that there would be so many sea beasts besieging the fleet. Moreover, when they arrived, 2 of the fleet's warships had already been destroyed. The remaining 3 warships were still holding on bitterly. The other 2 Hall Masters fought with all their might, but it was difficult for them to protect the 3 divine warships. After the shock and anger, the 5th Hall Master bellowed and led the 68 guards into the battlefield. He began to kill the army of sea beasts. The 5th Hall Master's valiant attack was naturally effective. After 3 to 5 rounds, he had killed more than 200 King of God Realm sea beasts. Although the battle was fruitful, it was insignificant compared to the army of 50,000 sea beasts. The 5th Hall Master was also in despair. No matter how many sea beasts he killed, he could not stop the army of sea beasts from swallowing the 3 divine warships. The intense and chaotic battle lasted for another 15 minutes before it ended. The final outcome was in line with the predictions of the Hall Masters. Another 2 divine warships were destroyed by the army of sea beasts. They turned into debris and scattered in the chaos sea. More than 700 elite King of God were killed by the army of sea beasts. They died without a complete corpse. The hundreds of elite King of God who were lucky enough to survive were all injured and on the verge of death. However, they were lucky enough to survive because they had escaped into the worship of the first Hall Master at the last moment. The first Hall Master's divine worship was also the last remaining worship of the fleet. It was an Emperor-level divine worship. It had extremely strong defense and power. More than 600 elite King of God were hiding in the worship. They were still safe for now. After all, no matter how hard the army of sea beasts besieged the worship, it was difficult for them to break through the defense of the first Hall Master's worship. The army of sea beasts also suffered heavy casualties. Of the initial 50,000 sea beasts, only 42,000 were left. More than 7,000 sea beasts had been killed in the previous battle. The pitch-black chaos sea was also dyed red with blood. Broken limbs and pieces of divine weapons floated everywhere. The remaining 40,000 sea beasts did not retreat because of the death of their companions. Instead, they became more bloodthirsty and murderous. They besieged the first Hall Master's worship even more desperately. They swore to tear the worship into pieces and blast the remaining 600 King of God into pieces. However, the 3 Palace Masters knew very well that there was no point in continuing this battle. The Great Hall's flagship was the last bastion, and it was impossible for the 40,000 sea beasts to break through it. The 3 Palace Masters could continue slaughtering the sea beasts, but doing so would only be a waste of time. The Lord Hall Master and the Shura God Emperor were besieged by several God Emperor-level sea beasts, and were already riddled with injuries. His life was at stake. Their top priority right now was to help the Lord Palace Master and the Azura God Emperor, not slaughter the sea beasts here. So, after the 3 Hall Masters had a brief discussion via voice transmission, they decisively boarded the Hall Master's flagship. With the 3rd Hall Master personally controlling the warship, the 4th Hall Master and the 5th Hall Master worked together to kill the sea beast army. Finally, a bloody path was opened for the warship to break out of the encirclement of the sea beast army. Seeing the 1st Palace Lord's flagship flee into the distance, the army of sea beasts was not willing to give up, and they chased after them for hundreds of thousands of miles. Unfortunately, were they not as fast as Emperor-level divine warships? In the end, he was still shaken off. The 1st Palace Lord's flagship had shaken off their pursuers, but the 600 people on the divine warship did not dare to let down their guard. The 4th Hall Master and the 5th Hall Master? They sent a message to the Lord Palace Master and the Shura God Emperor respectively, asking for their direction and location. Not long after, the 2 Hall Masters received the message Jade Slips. The Lord Palace Master stated his location, and 4 God Emperor-level sea beasts besieging him. How were his injuries? He also ordered the other Hall Masters to help him escape as soon as possible. The Shura God Emperor also sent a message back. Not only did he state the situation of 2 God Emperor-level sea beasts besieging him, he also stated his location. After the 3 Hall Masters received the message, they immediately came to a decision. The 3rd Hall Master and the 4th Hall Master? Piloting the Lord Palace Lord's flagship? They immediately rushed to rescue the Lord Palace Lord. And the 5th Hall Master was alone? To rescue the Shura God Emperor. The reason for this allocation was because the Lord Palace Lord was far more important than the Shura God Emperor. Moreover, the Lord Palace Lord was besieged by 4 God Emperor level sea beasts. His situation was even more dangerous. As for the Shura God Emperor, the 5th Hall Master only needed to try his best. If he really couldn't save the Shura God Emperor, then forget it. But the Lord Palace Lord was different. No matter the price, the 2 Hall Masters had to rescue him. Just like that, the 5th Hall Master left the warship and teleported across the Chaos Sea to rescue the Shura God Emperor. The 3rd Hall Master and the 4th Hall Master drove the warship and sped forward to rescue the Lord Palace Lord. Even though the Shura God Emperor was being chased by 2 God Emperor level sea beasts and was already 800,000 miles away from the battlefield. At this distance, the Hall Masters of the Xianxia Temple couldn't detect him. Unless they sent a message jade slip, the Hall Masters wouldn't know the Shura God Emperor's situation. The 2 sea beasts were mid-level God Emperor level sea beasts and had condensed 4 Taoist rhymes. They were on the same level as the Shura God Emperor. But the Shura God Emperor hadn't recovered from his injuries and could only use 60% of his combat strength. After being besieged by 2 God Emperor level sea beasts for so long, he was already riddled with wounds. His situation was getting worse and worse. Even so, Xianxia didn't let his guard down and act rashly. He knew very well that even if the Shura God Emperor was severely injured and only had 60% of his combat strength left, he still couldn't let his guard down. Once he acted against the Shura God Emperor, the situation would change. It was hard to tell how the 2 God Emperor level sea beasts would react. To be safe, Xianxia could only continue to wait and observe. The best thing would be to wait until the Shura God Emperor was severely injured and on the verge of death. Then he would directly strike and kill the Shura God Emperor in an instant. This way he could avoid future troubles and prevent any accidents. Facts proved that Xianxia's plan was very feasible. As time passed, the Shura God Emperor's injuries continued to worsen and worsen. His strength was also greatly depleted and his combat strength continued to decline. The 2 God Emperor level sea beasts became more and more violent as they fought. They completely suppressed the Shura God Emperor and made it difficult for him to escape. The Shura God Emperor was filled with anxiety and worry, but he couldn't find a good opportunity to escape from the 2 sea beasts. Helpless, he could only stall for time and think of a way to preserve his strength. Just as he was in despair and helplessness, a communication jade slip finally arrived in his hand. Opening it, he saw that the battle between the 3 temple masters and the tens of thousands of sea beasts had ended. Of the Xianxia Temple's fleet, only the 1st Temple Master's ship survived. There were still more than 600 God Kings alive. The rest had been killed by the sea beasts. Now the 3 Temple Masters were free to think of a way to rescue him and the 1st Temple Master. Hearing this news, the Shura God Emperor finally breathed a sigh of relief and calmed down. He hurriedly sent a message back, informing the 3 Temple Masters of his situation and location and requesting for help as soon as possible. After that, the Shura God Emperor regained his confidence and became calmer as he tried to think of a way to neutralize the attacks of the 2 sea beasts. He only needed to wait for one of the temple masters to come to his aid and he would be able to escape and even kill the other party. Chapter 46-28. The 2 God Emperor level sea beasts were no fools. They saw the Azura God Emperor in the middle of a battle and received a message from the jade slip. They immediately realized that the Azura God Emperor was calling for help, asking for reinforcements. The 2 sea beasts felt the pressure and urgency. They fought with all their might, wanting to kill the Azura God Emperor as soon as possible. The Azura God Emperor was also determined not to fight the 2 sea beasts head-on, dodging and dodging. In this way the 2 sides fought for another 100 breaths of time. Although the Azura God Emperor's injuries worsened and his strength weakened, he was confident that he could hold on until the 5th Hall Master came to save him. Xianxia, who had been observing the battle from the sidelines, could no longer hold back. Of course, he saw the Azura God Emperor sending and receiving the jade slip and guessed that the Hall Masters would come to save the Azura God Emperor. The key problem was that he couldn't see the contents of the conversation between the Azura God Emperor and the Hall Masters. He also didn't know which Hall Master would come to save the Azura God Emperor or when they would arrive. Xianxia estimated that the battle between the fleet and the sea beast army was close to 1,000,000 miles away. With the strength of the Hall Masters, it would take them at most half an hour to arrive. Xianxia estimated that he didn't have much time left. He had to kill the Azura God Emperor before one of the Hall Masters came to his rescue. Therefore he quietly flew over the Chaos Sea and silently approached the Azura God Emperor. At this time the Azura God Emperor was being attacked by two sea beasts from the front and back, enveloped in flames and divine light that blotted out the sky. The two sea beasts were tens of thousands of feet tall and their huge claws were about to hit the Azura God Emperor. At this critical moment, the Azura God Emperor naturally didn't dare to take the attack head-on. He could only dodge to the right, hoping to avoid the siege of two God Emperor sea beasts. However, Xianxia had watched him fight for a long time and had long guessed his intentions and his next move. When the Shura God Emperor dodged to the right, he was right in front of Xianxia. Soared through heaven. When Xianxia was only tens of thousands of feet away from the Azura God Emperor, he unhesitatingly took out the Burial of Heaven sword and used a powerful killing move. Xianxia held the sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands and unleashed all of his power. Supplemented by the power of Divine Tao and Heavenly Tao, he stabbed at the Azura God Emperor with all his might. The Shura God Emperor finally realized that something was wrong and that he was in grave danger. Before, the Azura God Emperor's attention had been focused on the two God Emperor sea beasts. Why wasn't he on guard? In the sky to the side, there was also a God Emperor hidden there. And that God Emperor wasn't a sea beast, but a desolate race male. And when he was at his weakest, he took the opportunity to sneak attack him. The Azura God Emperor panicked at that time. He was shocked and puzzled. He was furious. He hated that despicable bastard for colluding with the sea beasts and taking the opportunity to sneak attack him. However, as these thoughts flashed through his mind, the Azura God Emperor still had to find a way to dodge. No matter what, he had to dodge that dazzling and terrifying sword. The two God Emperor sea beasts were also stunned by Xianxia's sword. They were also very surprised. They didn't expect that while they were besieging the Azura God Emperor, there was a God Emperor hidden nearby. The most important thing was, this God Emperor wasn't a sea beast, but a desolate race member. What stunned them was, the desolate race God Emperor wasn't saving the Azura God Emperor, but assassinating the Azura God Emperor. What's going on? They're fighting amongst themselves? The two God Emperor sea beasts looked at each other and saw the shock and disbelief in each other's eyes. The next moment, the Azura God Emperor, who was severely injured and had his strength greatly reduced, in the end he couldn't dodge Xianxia's sure-kill sword. Ping! An earth-shattering sound rang out. The dazzling divine sword beam that was 3,000 feet long pierced the Azura God Emperor and drowned his figure. Even though at the most crucial moment, Emperor God Xiao Luo had unleashed all of his divine power to form the strongest shield to protect himself. Furthermore, he had used all his strength to activate the pitch-black Azura War Blade in front of him to block the sword attack. But the Emperor-grade divine weapon, the Azura War Blade, was sent flying, and the Azura God Emperor was sent tumbling thousands of miles away. His cloak and black robe had been shredded to pieces by the terrifying sword Qi. His divine body, which was already covered in cracks, was now filled with cracks like a broken porcelain vase. Dark red blood gushed out like a fountain, dyeing the Azura God Emperor blood red. Even though he was using his powerful willpower to control his shattered body, he didn't fall apart. But his divine bones and internal organs had long been shattered by Xianxia's sword attack. Blood and froth continued to gush out of his mouth and nose. Xianxia's all-out sword attack had almost destroyed the Azura God Emperor's divine body, causing him to suffer immeasurable damage. His combat strength had also dropped to about 40%. After flying thousands of miles away, the Azura God Emperor was about to fall into the Chaos Sea. He forcefully circulated his divine power and stopped himself in the sky. Even though his divine body was on the verge of destruction, his mind remained clear. In the current situation, he couldn't stay any longer to tangle with his opponent. Whether it was the two sea beasts or the unfamiliar desolate race God Emperor, they could all threaten his life. The Azura God Emperor didn't hesitate to turn around and flee in the direction he came from. He had already memorized Xianxia's current appearance. If he could escape alive, he would definitely tell the temple masters of the Shangqing Temple about this. He believed that the few hall masters definitely knew who the God the Arch-Desolate Race man was. However, the Azura God Emperor's injuries were too severe. He had only used teleportation 3 times in the sky. Just as he had teleported 80,000 miles away, his injuries had completely flared up. Blood splattered all over his body. If he continued to use teleportation, his divine body would immediately explode, leaving behind only a divine spark. Helpless, the Azura God Emperor could only give up on teleportation and desperately fly back. The two God Emperor sea beasts finally regained their senses. They looked at Ji Tianxing fearfully before turning around to pursue the Azura God Emperor. No matter who the desolate race God Emperor was or why he wanted to assassinate the Azura God Emperor, it wouldn't affect their mission and plan. Whoosh! Whoosh! The two sea beasts used teleportation 4 times in a row to catch up with the Azura God Emperor, who was covered in blood. The two sea beasts roared angrily and unleashed powerful spells to attack the Azura God Emperor from both sides. Emperor God Xiu Luo was helpless and aggrieved. He could only activate Xiu Luo Battle Blade and transform it into a huge blade to protect himself. Bang bang. Boom boom boom. The two sea beasts' divine technique attacks slammed into the Azura Warblade, creating a deafening explosion. The Azura God Emperor's speed slowed down a little. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to catch up. This time he found another chance to swing his sword and use his unique skill to attack Emperor God Xiu Luo. Chapter 46-29. Ji Tianxing didn't know the two sea beasts, nor did he communicate with them. But both sides shared the same goal, to kill the Azura God Emperor. Thus they had a tacit understanding. When the two sea beasts besieged the Azura God Emperor, preventing him from escaping, Ji Tianxing drew on the power of the 5 elements and used his most powerful killing move. Sword of World Annihilation. Ji Tianxing gripped the Sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands, erupting with boundless power. Fusing the power of the world, divine Tao and heavenly Tao, he slashed out a 10,000 zhang long giant sword. This sword radiated a dazzling divine light, exuding a majestic divine aura. Like the blazing sun, it drove away the darkness and illuminated the surrounding tens of thousands of li. The chaotic fog that filled the sky retreated, and the inky black sea surged with waves thousands of zhang high. The terrifying sword intent locked onto the Azura God Emperor's aura. He had nowhere to hide, nor could he escape. In his despair he could only use the Azura War Blade to block, hoping to save his life. In the next moment the Sword of World Annihilation struck the Azura God Emperor, but the Azura War Blade blocked it. The 100 zhang long blood-red war blade was sent flying. The edge of the blade curled up and several cracks appeared on the blade. The God Emperor's Azura War Blade was damaged by Ji Tianxing, its power plummeting and its divine light dimming. The Azura God Emperor, who was protected by the Azura War Blade, also suffered a devastating blow. The all-destroying power passed through the Azura War Blade and slammed into his divine body. His body, which was already full of cracks, could no longer hold on and shattered into pieces on the spot. After his divine body was destroyed, the Azura God Emperor's godhead was the only thing left, but it wasn't intact. His mental and physical state were poor and his combat strength was at its weakest. He couldn't fight anymore. Angered and frightened, he no longer dared to tangle with Ji Tianxing. He could only push the broken Azura battle blade to the side, disregarding everything else as he fled. Whoosh! The Azura War Blade, which was covered in cracks, ignited with a dark red blood flame. It streaked across the night sky like a bolt of lightning. Speed was pushed to the limit. In order to escape, the Azura God Emperor did not hesitate to ignite the Azura War Blade, stimulating the final potential of this Emperor-grade divine weapon. As long as he could live, so what if he had to sacrifice this Emperor-grade divine artifact? Anyway, with the backing of the Shangqing Temple, he could refine more Emperor-level divine weapons in the future. Even though the Shura God Emperor had cut off all means of retreat, he was willing to do anything to survive. However, the cruel reality was something he could never change. The Azura War Blade turned into a streak of fire, streaking across the night sky like a bolt of lightning, but it still couldn't escape the pursuit of the two sea beasts and Ji Tianxing. 2 breaths later, the two sea beasts once again entangled the Azura War Blade. They unleashed their ultimate divine arts and divine arts with all their might, sending the Shura War Blade flying with the power of the heavenly Tao. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to attack again. He brandished the Burial of Heaven and used a sword technique. Swoosh! The dazzling giant sword, like a scorching sun, cut across the night sky and slashed at the Azura War Blade. The Azura War Blade, which had already exhausted its energy and was full of cracks, could no longer withstand the attack and exploded on the spot. Bang! Amidst the deafening explosion, the Azura war blade exploded into fragments that scattered in all directions, creating a terrifying shockwave. The sky for tens of thousands of miles was illuminated by a dazzling divine light. The surrounding chaotic sea stirred up waves of thousands of feet, creating a terrifying sound. The Azura warblade was completely destroyed, and its debris fell into the sea and drifted in all directions. The Azura God Emperor's divine spark flew out and turned into a streak of blood-red light, leaving a long trail of afterimages in the night sky. He stimulated his survival potential and escaped into the distance at an incredible speed. Xianxia and the two sea beasts naturally wouldn't give up and continued their pursuit of the Azura God Emperor's divine spark. The Azura God Emperor had only escaped 50,000 miles when Xianxia caught up to him. The two sea beasts flanked him from both sides and were about to intercept the Azura God Emperor. In the chaotic sea, the two sea beasts had the advantage of location and were able to move faster. The Azura God Emperor was filled with despair and thought that he was doomed. He was about to be surrounded by the two sea beasts and Xianxia and his divine spark would be destroyed. But at this moment something happened that made him go wild with joy. In the pitch-black night sky, a dazzling divine light appeared and a dazzling figure rushed over as fast as lightning. Even from afar, the Azura God Emperor could see that the figure was not a sea beast, but a desolate race male. Furthermore, the figure gave him a sense of familiarity and intimacy. Sixth Palace Lord. I'm here to help you. The figure was still 30,000 miles away, but he had already shouted these words. His voice was filled with anxiety and worry. When Emperor God Xiaoluo heard that, he felt extremely close and his heart was filled with gratitude. There was even a tinge of warmth. It's the fifth Palace Lord. He's finally here to save me. Perhaps before this, the Azura God Emperor and the Palace Lords of the Xianxia Temple didn't have a deep relationship. But from this moment onwards, the fact that the fifth Palace Lord had come to save him when he was on the brink of death was enough to make him remember it for life. In the future, if possible, he would treat the fifth Palace Lord as a friend and build a deep friendship with him. But now was not the time to think about this. The most important thing was that the fifth Palace Lord had come to save him so that he could escape this place alive. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Even from 10,000 miles away, the fifth Palace Lord waved his battle sword and slashed out sword beams that filled the sky. He attacked the sea beasts on both sides with unparalleled strength. Seeing this, the Azura God Emperor pondered another question in his mind. It was a good thing that the fifth Palace Lord had come, but the problem was, why did the fifth Palace Lord come alone? Where were the third and fourth Palace Lords? He was now being besieged by two sea beasts and the desolate race God Emperor. With just the fifth Palace Lord's support, it was unlikely that he could be saved. Even if the fifth Palace Lord had taken action and blocked the sea beasts on both sides, there was still the desolate race God Emperor behind him. The Azura God Emperor wanted to warn the fifth Palace Lord that he had to be careful. There was still the desolate race God Emperor. But what made the Azura God Emperor stunned was that when he scanned his surroundings with his perception, he realized that the desolate race God Emperor had disappeared. What happened? He was just behind this emperor. Why did he suddenly disappear? The Azura God Emperor realized that something was amiss. He increasingly felt that there was something wrong with the desolate race God Emperor. Previously he was busy escaping, so he did not have the time or effort to check on the desolate race God Emperor. But now that he thought about it carefully, he realized that something was amiss. He felt that the identity of the desolate race God Emperor seemed to have a huge flaw. Firstly, there were not many desolate race God Emperors on the planet of origin. There were less than 30 of them in total. The Xianxia Temple knew the name of every God Emperor. The Azura God Emperor had also seen the corresponding roster and knew that 90% of the desolate race God Emperors were God Emperors. Only the desolate race God Emperor behind him had no impression of him at all. Secondly, the desolate race God Emperor's divine techniques and divine aura did not seem to have much to do with the desolate race. Instead, it was very similar to his divine aura. What was even more ridiculous was that the Azura God Emperor felt that the desolate race God Emperor gave him a familiar feeling. Chapter 46:30. In a short span of time, many thoughts flashed through the Shura God Emperor's mind. There were too many ideas. However, he could only suspect that there was something wrong with the identity of the desolate race God Emperor. There was no time to investigate the identity of the desolate race God Emperor. Saving his own life was the most important thing. Kaboom! In a deafening explosion, the fifth palace master's mystic technique collided with the counterattack of the two sea beasts. Along with a terrifying explosion, a destructive shockwave erupted and swept out in all directions. The two sea beasts were not weaker than the fifth palace master, so they were naturally not pushed back. However, they were distracted by the fifth palace master's attack, so they had no time to chase after the Shura god emperor. They could only watch as the Shura god emperor's divinity continued to flee thousands of miles away. The fifth palace master's goal was the same. He did not expect to be able to push back the two sea beasts. He only wanted to save the Shura god emperor. It seemed that the Shura god emperor was about to reach the fifth palace master. As long as the two of them met, the Shura god emperor would definitely enter the fifth palace master's divine weapon. At that time, the fifth palace master would definitely not continue fighting. He would definitely escape with the Shura god emperor. Although the two sea beasts were powerful, they had been chasing after the Shura god emperor for so long. They had exhausted too much of their energy, so it would be difficult for them to continue chasing after the fifth palace master. Therefore, the Shura god emperor was only one step away from escaping. Even the Shura god emperor himself felt that he could escape death soon. However, the two sea beasts could not stop the Shura god emperor, but it did not mean that he could escape. The moment the fifth palace master appeared, Xianxia had turned invisible and disappeared without a trace. It was not that he was afraid of the fifth palace master, nor was it that he had given up chasing after the Shura god emperor. Instead, he wanted to catch the fifth palace master off guard so that he could surprise him and give the Shura god emperor a fatal blow. And now it was the opportunity he had been waiting for. At this time, the Azura god emperor was only 1,000 li away from the fifth hall master. The two sea beasts were still 20,000 miles away. They might not be able to catch up with the Azura god emperor. Even if the two of them were to forcefully attack, the fifth palace master had already gripped his battle sword tightly, ready to block and neutralize their attacks at any moment. He had already opened the entrance of the divine pot and was waiting for the Azura god emperor to come before him. As the lord of Xianxia Temple, his greatest advantage was that he had endless wealth and cultivation resources at his disposal. If an ordinary god emperor had an imperial artifact, it would already be very good. For example, Xianxia and the Azura god emperor. The fifth hall master had two emperor-level divine artifacts. One was the divine sword in his hand, and the other was the divine pot at his waist. As long as the Shura god emperor entered the divine pot, he had a 90% chance of escaping with the Shura god emperor. However, sword light flashed. Sword of destruction. At the critical moment, a dazzling sword light suddenly lit up behind the Azura god emperor's back. The giant golden sword, which was 30,000 feet long, had the power to destroy everything. It instantly descended on the Azura god emperor's head, drowning his godhood. The Azura god emperor had no chance to dodge, nor was he able to dodge in time. He was directly hit by the sword. The fifth hall master was stunned on the spot. He stared dumbfoundedly at the giant divine sword and the figure in the darkness. He never expected that at the moment when the Azura god emperor was about to be rescued, a desolate god emperor would suddenly appear in front of him and attack the Azura god emperor. Moreover, although he did not know the desolate god emperor, he was sure of one thing. That tall and burly desolate youth was definitely a disciple of Xianxia Temple. Furthermore, just a few hours ago he had followed him and the other hall masters into the Eternal Night Sea region to explore the door of Heavenly Tao. Thinking of this, the fifth hall master instantly recalled. That's right, it's him. Among the 70 surviving guards, he was one of them. When we left the door of Heavenly Tao, he was still in a daze. I even reprimanded him. The fifth hall master's memory was very good, so he instantly remembered. But he was immediately stunned and he was even more shocked and surprised. Impossible. He was just a high-level deity king. How did he become a god emperor? The fifth hall master could not accept this result and he could not figure out the reason. Kaboom! A deafening sound burst out, reverberating through the universe and spreading over a radius of 50,000 miles. Emperor God Xiao Luo's divinity exploded into dozens of pieces under the sword of extermination that could destroy heaven and earth and splattered in all directions. Even if it was a god emperor, his life, power and laws were all concentrated in the godhood. The shattering and destruction of the godhood represented death and fall. The Azura God Emperor had spent 1,000 years of effort to come to the planet of origin, and he finally saw the hope of eternal life. However, before he could execute his plan and achieve his revenge, he died under Ji Tianxing's sword and was buried in the Chaos Sea. At this moment, the Azura God Emperor died in despair, filled with endless anger and indignation. Maybe it was because he sensed the heavenly Tao, or maybe it was because he had a momentary lapse of consciousness before his death. At the moment when he was hit by the sword of destruction, he suddenly understood. He also finally understood why he found the desolate race in front of him familiar. He thought of a person, Ken Longtian. Only this guy could cultivate the way of the sword to such a level, and he could be said to be the best in the world. And only he could use such a divine and glorious sword that could destroy everything. Although the Azura God Emperor could not understand, nor did he have the time to investigate why Long Tian came to the planet of origin, why he became a desolate race God Emperor and lurked beside him. But he still believed in his intuition and judgment. Or it could be said that this was the heavenly Tao's final revelation to him, telling him the answer. The person who killed him was Kenshin Long Tian, who said that the heavenly Tao was heartless. At least the Azura God Emperor knew who killed him before he died. This could be considered a gift from the heavenly Tao, right? Just like that, the Azura God Emperor died in anger and indignation. Heaven and earth were dazzling, and it was only when the dazzling golden sword dissipated that darkness returned. At the same time, Ji Tianxing had already teleported several times, and used a grappling technique to retrieve the Azura God Emperor's shard of divinity. There was silence. The two sea beasts were silent, and the fifth palace master was in shock, confusion, and disbelief. He could not recover for a long time. Even though he had seen the Azura God Emperor die, he could not accept this result. The mighty God Emperor, the sixth palace master of the Xianxia temple, died so carelessly? That was the God Emperor, the strongest person who was closest to immortality. How could he be killed so easily as if he was a divine king? Moreover, he was killed by a desolate race God Emperor. The two sea beasts and the fifth palace master remained silent, unable to recover from their shock. Ji Tianxing was not calm either. He held the burial of heaven's sword in his right hand, and the Azura God Emperor's shard of divinity in his left hand. He murmured with a complicated expression, "The hatred between you and me is written off." Chapter 46-31. More than 1,000 years ago, the 5 peak god kings had joined forces to kill Kenshin. After Kenshin's death, the 5 peak god kings had comprehended the eternal heavenly book and had broken through to the God Emperor realm. Now Ji Tianxing had killed the Azura God Emperor and had their revenge. A life for a life. With the death of the Azura God Emperor, the enmity between the two was naturally cancelled out. After Ji Tianxing finished speaking, the two sea beasts and the fifth palace master came back to their senses. Originally, the two sea beasts wanted to continue attacking the fifth palace master and kill him before they were willing to stop. Then they would meet up with the other 4 God Emperor realm sea beasts. However, Ji Tianxing was still present. The two sea beasts were unsure of the situation between Ji Tianxing and the fifth palace master. Although Ji Tianxing had killed the sixth palace master of Xianxia temple, and logically speaking he should be an enemy of Xianxia temple. However, the sea beast had always understood that the desolate race was full of scheming and deceit. It was not something they could easily see through. Therefore, before Ji Tianxing made his move and made his next move clear, they would not easily take action. The fifth palace master was also full of vigilance and wariness. He stared at the two sea beasts and Ji Tianxing. The 3 God Emperor experts in front of him were all enemies of Xianxia temple. They had the reason and motive to kill him. However, he knew very well that the two sea beasts would definitely not collude with Ji Tianxing. Therefore, the two sides might not join forces to deal with him. Since the fifth palace master and the two sea beasts did not take action, Ji Tianxing kept the burial of heaven's sword and flew away. He came to Xianxia temple's territory and entered the Chaos Sea. After many twists and turns, it was all to seek revenge on the Azura God Emperor. Now that he had taken his revenge and achieved his goal, he naturally had to leave. As for Xianxia temple, he had no enmity with them, so why should he provoke them? Swoosh! Ji Tianxing transformed into a stream of light and flew across the night sky. Soon he crossed tens of thousands of miles of sea area and disappeared in the chaos mist. The two sea beasts and the fifth palace master watched him disappear, and they all secretly let out a sigh of relief. Without the mysterious desolate race god emperor, the situation became a lot clearer. However, their reactions were different. The two sea beasts started to surround the fifth palace master from the left and right. They locked onto the fifth palace master's aura, revealing their killing intent. As for the fifth hall master, he took out two transmission jade slips and informed the first hall master and the third hall master of what had happened earlier. Not only did he have to inform the hall masters that the Azura god emperor had been killed by a desolate race god emperor. He even described Ji Tianxing's appearance, strength, realm, and temperament to the temple masters. No matter what, he had been ordered to rescue the Azura god emperor. Since he had failed to complete the mission, he had to give the first palace master an explanation. Even if the Azura god emperor had been killed, he could not be muddle-headed. There had to be an explanation. Just as the fifth hall master sent out the transmission jade slips, the two sea beasts had already surrounded him. They roared angrily as they used their divine powers to launch a siege attack. Swish, swish, swish. A dazzling divine light, a sword beam and spear shadow that could split the heavens and earth came crashing down on the fifth hall master. The fifth hall master did not hesitate at all. He immediately used his teleportation technique and turned to escape. He would rather use the divine sword and divine pot to protect himself, minimizing the damage he received as much as possible, than to get entangled with the two sea beasts. Although he had seen Ji Tianxing fly away with his own eyes, Ji Tianxing's origins were too mysterious and his whereabouts were too strange. He did not dare to let his guard down. If Ji Tianxing returned while he was fighting with the two sea beasts and lurked beside him, giving him a fatal blow at the critical moment, then wouldn't he follow in the footsteps of the Azura god emperor and die on the spot? It was because of this reason that the fifth hall master decided to escape and not fight with the two sea beasts. Boom, 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 boom. The sky was filled with saber light, sword shadows, and the light of divine spells. They violently blasted into the chaos sea, creating a deafening explosion and stirring up huge waves. The attacks of the two sea beasts missed, and the fifth hall master was only slightly affected. The divine sword and divine pot neutralized the impact, so he was not seriously injured. He took the opportunity to escape tens of thousands of miles away, widening the distance between him and the two sea beasts. He rode the divine sword and ran all the way to meet up with the first hall master. Somewhere in the sea 2 million miles away from the fifth hall master. The first hall master had been fighting and retreating, facing the siege of the four sea beasts with difficulty. Although he had the strength of an upper-level god emperor, he was confident that he could kill any god emperor-level sea beast in a one-on-one battle. However, when the four sea beasts worked together, they forced him to retreat repeatedly. He was beaten to the point where he could not fight back and his injuries kept worsening. The first hall master had been suppressing his anger for a long time. He was so angry that he almost went crazy, but he did not have a chance to fight back. He looked more and more miserable. His hair was disheveled, his clothes were ragged, and his body was covered in blood. He looked very sloppy. Finally, when the third and fourth hall masters arrived, he was finally free. The four sea beasts were all in the middle level of God Emperor. Among them, Lan Long and Yu Bingxin were injured and could not use their full strength. The third and fourth hall masters were slightly stronger than the four sea beasts. When they worked together with the first hall master, they could naturally turn the tables and gain the upper hand. The situation was reversed. Previously, the four sea beasts were chasing after the first hall master. Now it was the three hall masters who worked together to defeat the four sea beasts. They could only defend themselves. The two sides fought for 100 breaths of time, exchanging hundreds of blows. When the first hall master waved his scepter and sent Lan Long and Yu Bingxin flying, blood spurting out of their orifices into the chaos sea, the first hall master finally vented his anger. He wanted to continue the chase and kill Lan Long and Yu Bingxin. He even wanted to kill the other two sea beasts to prevent any future trouble. However, at this moment the four sea beasts unanimously decided to retreat and stop fighting. With their geographical advantage, they knew the chaos sea like the back of their hands. With the cover of the chaos fog, they quickly disappeared without a trace. The three hall masters chased them for hundreds of thousands of miles, but they could not catch up to them. Instead they were left further and further behind. From the looks of it, it was hopeless to chase after the 4 sea beasts. At this moment the first hall master and third hall master received a transmission jade slip from the 5th hall master. When they finished reading the contents of the jade slip they were shocked. The 6th hall master was killed? He is a god emperor. How could he have fallen so easily? He was killed by a desolate race god emperor? How is that possible? Which temple's hall master dares to attack our Shangqing temple? The 1st hall master and 3rd hall master found it unbelievable. They searched through their memories trying to guess which desolate race god emperor would attack and kill the Shura god emperor. When the 4th hall master saw that the 2 of them were stunned, he asked with a voice transmission, "What happened? Are we still going to continue chasing after the 4 sea beasts?" The 1st hall master decisively put away the transmission jade slip and ordered with a gloomy expression, "There is no need to chase after the 4 sea beasts. Immediately rescue the 5th hall master and kill that desolate race god emperor. I want to see who that fellow is. He dares to be so audacious as to assassinate my hall master." Chapter 46-32. The 3rd and 4th palatial lords did not hesitate to carry out the Grand Palatial Lord's orders. The Grand Palatial Lord took out his warship and the 3 of them immediately entered it. In order to allow the warship to reach its fastest speed, the Grand Palatial Lord personally controlled the warship and continuously teleported in the night sky. Swish, swish. The warship transformed into a stream of light and constantly disappeared and flashed in the night sky, going further and further away. On the way to the south, the Grand Palatial Lord controlled the array in the control room. The 3rd and 4th Palatial Lords stood behind him and the 3 of them were still discussing the matter. Could that unknown desolate race god emperor have colluded with the aquatic beasts? According to the 5th Palatial Lord, before he met the Shura god emperor, he did not discover the existence of the desolate race god emperor. When he was about to rescue the Shura god emperor, the desolate race god emperor suddenly appeared and killed the Shura god emperor in one move. When the 5th Palatial Lord arrived, the Shura god emperor's divine body had already been destroyed and he was only left with a divine persona. Although the Shura god emperor is not very strong, he is still a god emperor. How could he be seriously injured to the point of having his divine body destroyed in just 2 hours? I am certain that the desolate race god emperor and the 2 aquatic beasts have joined forces. Whether the desolate race god emperor colluded with the aquatic beasts is something that cannot be determined for the time being. This is a taboo matter. Once it is exposed, the desolate race god emperor will no longer have a foothold on the continent. By the way, how is the 5th Palatial Lord's current situation? Is he in any danger? When the Grand Palatial Lord arrived, the 4th Palatial Lord hurriedly took out a transmission jade slip and sent a message to the 5th Palatial Lord to inquire about the situation. After a while, the 5th Palatial Lord sent a message back, indicating that he was escaping and had yet to escape the pursuit of the 2 aquatic beasts. However, the 2 aquatic beasts were not very strong and they had expended too much of their god power, so they were temporarily unable to do anything to him. According to the current situation, he would be able to shake off the 2 aquatic beasts in another hour. After learning that the 3 Hall Lords were piloting a battleship towards the south to intercept and kill the mysterious desolate race god emperor, the 5th Hall Lord expressed his support. The 3 Hall Lords only needed to search for the desolate race god emperor and did not need to send anyone to rescue him. Since the 5th Hall Master's life was not in danger, the 3 Hall Masters were no longer worried about him. They focused on their journey to kill the desolate race's god emperor. The Grand Palatial Lord pondered for a moment before ordering the 3rd Palatial Lord. Just now, in the message sent by the 5th Palatial Lord, there was a projection of the desolate race's god emperor's appearance. It also introduced that fellow's situation. The 5th Palace Lord said that he remembered the desolate race's god emperor. He was one of the 70 surviving guards, but it was unknown when he left the team. The 3rd Palace Master nodded and said with a complicated expression, "Logically speaking, the 5th Palace Master must have recognized the wrong person. How could there be a god emperor among the disciples of our palace?" But the 5th Palace Master would not lie to us, and he said it so confidently. If this matter is true, it means that the desolate race's god emperor has hidden himself very well. He deliberately sneaked into our palace and took the opportunity to assassinate the 6th Palace Master. There must be a bigger conspiracy behind this, and it is extremely dangerous for our Xianxia palace. The fourth palatial lord also nodded slightly to express his agreement. He said in a deep voice, "Regardless, we have to find that fellow and figure out the truth of the matter. If not, that fellow might very well use other schemes to topple the Xianxia palace." The three hall lords realized the seriousness of the matter. The grand palatial lord ordered, "The two of you go and search the survivors. Do any of them know the desolate race's god emperor and know his origins?" "Yes." The third palatial lord and the fourth palatial lord cupped their hands and left the cockpit. Following that, the two of them entered the battleship's hall and gathered the 600 elite godly monarchs that had survived. When everyone was gathered in the hall, the third palatial lord waved his hand and produced a divine light that floated in mid-air. In the blazing white divine light, a blurry figure appeared. It was a tall and burly desolate race youth. It was Ji Tianxing's previous appearance. The fourth palatial lord ordered everyone to carefully observe the figure. He wanted to see if anyone knew this person and his origins. The 600 elite godly monarchs stared intently at the light screen, observing the blurry figure. Suddenly, a peak godly monarch stood up from the crowd. Reporting to the two palatial lords, "I recognize this person." When this voice sounded, everyone's gaze landed on him. The two palatial lords raised their eyebrows and looked over. They saw a pale-faced desolate race man in armor with a somewhat weak aura. He stood up with a complicated expression. This person was none other than the deputy hall lord of the Three Mountain Hall. Although the Xianxia palace had suffered heavy casualties in the previous battle, with more than 1,000 of the 2,000 elite godly monarchs dying, leaving only about 600 people alive. The Guardian battleship that he was on was the first to be destroyed by the Sea Beast army. More than 20 elite godly monarchs from the Three Mountain Hall had all perished in the Chaos Sea. However, he was the deputy hall lord and was also a peak godly monarch. Although he was heavily injured and his combat strength had decreased greatly, he had managed to survive the battle. At this moment, the two palatial lords solemnly gathered everyone and took out an image. The person in the image was Zhou Xian of the Three Mountain Hall. This made the deputy hall lord somewhat nervous and excited. He thought to himself, why did the two palatial lords gather everyone and ask about Zhou Xian's identity? Could it be that Zhou Xian finally found a suitable opportunity to display his strength and make a great contribution? That despicable guy, he should have done so long ago. I just did not expect him to be so patient. He only displayed his true strength at this juncture and left a deep impression on the two palatial lords. Although the Xianxia palace had suffered heavy losses in this operation, the deputy hall lord did not feel the pinch. As long as Zhou Xian performed well enough to attract the attention of the palatial lords and bring glory to the Three Mountain Hall, that would be enough. But who is he? The fourth palatial lord frowned and stared at the deputy hall lord with a dignified expression. The deputy hall lord was so happy that he did not notice the changes in the expressions of the two palatial lords. He said directly, reporting to the two palatial lords, "I am the deputy hall lord of the Three Mountain Hall. This person is a citizen of the Three Mountain Hall. His name is Zhou Xian. He only made a name for himself during the elite selection. I led him to the Xianxia mystic realm." Not only did the deputy hall lord introduce Zhou Xian's background, but he also wanted to bring him along. Naturally, he wanted to show off his achievements. However, he did not expect that before he could finish his words, the fourth palace master waved his hand and shot out a ray of green light that sucked him in front of him. "You will come with us. The rest of you leave." With that, the two palatial lords took the deputy hall lord of the Three Mountain Halls and left. The screen of light in the air gradually dissipated. Over 600 elite god kings looked at each other in dismay. After the two palatial lords left, the quiet hall immediately became noisy. Everyone was whispering to each other, wondering what had happened. Chapter 46-33. Logically speaking, being able to stand out from more than 600 god kings and catch the attention of the hall masters was an extremely good thing. However, the vice hall master of the Three Mountain Hall was being carried away by the two hall masters. From the two hall masters' expressions and auras, they seemed to be very angry. The vice hall master of the Three Mountain Hall seemed to be in trouble, and it was a very serious one at that. Thinking of this, the crowd no longer envied him. Instead, they sympathized with him. The matter seemed to have arisen because of Zhou Xian of the Three Mountain Hall. Then they would have to see how serious the matter was. Many elite god kings gathered in the hall discussing as they waited. From their point of view, if they waited a little longer and saw whether the vice hall master of the Three Mountain Hall could return safely, they would be able to see some clues. If the matter was serious enough, the vice hall master of the Three Mountain Hall might not be able to return. At this moment, the vice hall master of the Three Mountain Hall was more nervous and apprehensive than anyone else. He no longer dared to have any extravagant hopes that Zhou Xian had made some great contribution and brought honor to the Three Mountain Hall. Even the stupidest person could tell that Zhou Xian must have made a huge mistake and caused a huge disaster to implicate him. He only prayed that bastard Zhou Xian wouldn't cause too much trouble and cause him to be unable to clean up the mess. He might even be punished for implicating him. Now that the two hall masters had brought him away, they were definitely going to confront Zhou Xian. The vice hall master thought to himself that when he saw Zhou Xian later, he would definitely reprimand him. Furthermore, he wanted to push all of the blame onto Zhou Xian and cast himself clean. He absolutely could not be implicated by him. Soon, the two hall masters brought the vice hall master to the cockpit of the warship. The first hall master was controlling the array to fly the warship. He looked at the front of the warship with his back to the crowd, but he still emitted an invisible pressure. This was the first time the vice hall master of the Three Mountain Hall had been so close to the first hall master. Apart from excitement, he also felt fear. Unfortunately, he was being carried by the fourth hall master. Otherwise, he would definitely pay respects to the first hall master. Whoosh! The two hall masters entered the room. The fourth hall master threw the vice hall master of the Three Mountain Hall onto the ground and bowed to the first hall master. First hall master, the person has been brought here. The Three Mountain Hall master of the Three Mountain Hall master was terrified. He did not dare to imagine what Zhou Xian had done to infuriate the hall master of the three hall masters. He quickly crawled to his feet and bowed to the first hall master of the Three Mountain Hall master. However, the first palace master was obviously not interested in his empty courtesy. He asked in a deep voice, "What's that person's name? Where did he come from?" The vice hall masters of the Three Mountains didn't dare to hide anything. They hurriedly reported Zhou Xian's life experiences in detail. After hearing this, the first palace master fell into silence. He seemed to be analyzing Zhou Xian's life experience, trying to find the problem. Why was it that an ostracized high god king of the Three Mountain Hall who had disappeared for 10,000 years, could suddenly become a god emperor expert? Moreover, this god emperor had hidden his strength and sneaked into the 3,000 elite divine kings selected by the Xianxia temple to assassinate the sixth hall master of the Xianxia temple. Was there anything suspicious about this? Everyone's silence made the vice hall masters even more uneasy and fearful. He mustered up his courage and took the initiative to ask, "Three honorable hall masters, although Zhou Xian is a citizen of our Three Mountain Hall, this subordinate has no relationship with him at all and knows nothing about him. If he has committed a grave mistake, I hope that the three palace masters can understand that this has nothing to do with our Three Mountain Hall. If I may be so bold as to ask, what crime did Zhou Xian commit to make you so angry?" The third hall master and fourth hall master frowned at the same time. They were about to reprimand the vice hall masters for interrupting the first hall master's thoughts. However, the first hall master said in a deep voice, "Zhou Xian is a god emperor expert. He deliberately infiltrated the Xianxia temple and colluded with the sea beast race in the depths of the Chaos Sea to assassinate the sixth hall master." Ah! Upon hearing this news, the vice hall masters felt like they had been struck by lightning. They were stunned on the spot and their eyes and expressions were filled with horror. They could not believe that the ostracized and depressed Zhou Xian had become a god emperor expert and had even assassinated the sixth hall master. How shocking and absurd was this? However, the vice hall masters quickly snapped out of their shock and astonishment. They noticed something else. That was, Zhou Xian had colluded with the sea beast race to assassinate the sixth hall master. The crime of colluding with the sea beast race was not a small one. It was an unforgivable crime of being an enemy of the entire desolate race and betraying the desolate race. According to the rules of the Xianxia temple, committing such a crime was punishable by death and would implicate one's loved ones. The vice hall masters were so frightened that their legs turned to jelly. They quickly waved their hands and said in a sobbing tone, "Hallmasters, please investigate this clearly. I really did not know about this. If I knew that Su Juechen was hiding his strength and harboring evil intentions, I would have risked my life to capture him and hand him over to you for punishment." These words were from the bottom of his heart, but the hallmasters were speechless. Nonsense. Su Juechen had been operating under our noses and had even deceived us hallmasters. You are just a vice hallmaster of the Three Mountain Hall, a mere peak divine king. How could you have seen through Su Juechen's disguise? Of course, the three hallmasters kept these words in their hearts and would never say it out loud. This was because it was too embarrassing. The Grand Hallmaster ignored the Vice Hallmaster's complaints and continued asking, "Now, Su Juechen has already escaped from the scene of the incident and seems to have fled to the south. We are trying our best to track him down. With your understanding and knowledge of Su Juechen, where do you think he will go next?" Seeing that the Vice Hallmasters were about to cry again and deny their relationship with Su Juechen, the Grand Hallmaster added, "Tell us the truth. If you can tell us Su Juechen's whereabouts, I can pardon your crime and punishment." The Vice Hallmasters felt even more despair when they heard this. What did this mean? He had already been convicted by the three Hallmasters and was about to be punished. He did not want to answer, but if he did not, he would not have the chance to redeem himself and would be punished. If he answered, it would show that he had some relationship with Su Juechen. The key point was that he did not know Su Juechen and could not guess where Su Juechen would go. This was a dilemma that left him at a loss of what to do. The Vice Hallmasters were so anxious that they did not know what to do. Their thoughts were in a mess and they did not know what to say. The fourth Hallmaster frowned as he watched from the side. His face became colder and colder. He suggested, "Grand Hallmaster, look at this guy's cowardice and helplessness. I don't think he can say anything. Why don't we kill him and use a secret technique to extract his soul and memories? Then the truth will be revealed." Such a ruthless suggestion scared the Vice Hallmasters out of their wits. They fell to the ground and cried, "I don't know, I really don't know. Lord Hallmaster, please don't kill me. Spare me." Chapter 46-34. Naturally, the three deputy hallmasters did not have a good ending. Of course, it was not tragic. The three hallmasters were sharp and experienced. Naturally, they could see that there was no relationship between him and Su Juechen. However, the three hallmasters were still angry. They had to find a reason to vent their anger. The three deputy hallmasters behaved so badly. Su Juechen was indeed selected and brought into Xianxia Divine Palace by him. No matter what, he could not absolve himself from the blame. Therefore, the first hallmaster still ordered the three deputy hallmasters to be punished. The reason was not because of his relationship with Su Juechen. It was because he was not strict with his subordinates and offended his superiors. The punishment was not too severe. He was only stripped of his position as deputy hallmaster, demoted to a commoner, and punished to reflect on his mistakes for 1,000 years. In the end, the three deputy hallmasters who escaped death left the cockpit dejectedly. They were carried back to the hall by 2 guards. The hundreds of elite divine kings who were waiting in the hall heaved a sigh of relief when they saw that the 3 deputy hallmasters had returned alive. From the looks of it, that guy called Su Juechen shouldn't have done anything too serious. However, the vice hallmasters of the 3 mountains sects looked as if they had lost their wits. Everyone was puzzled and confused. It was not a big deal. Why was he so frightened? Could it be that he was intimidated by the majesty of the palace masters? Or perhaps, the hall masters had used some sort of method to interrogate him? As the many elite god kings thought about it, they felt that the latter was more likely. In the cockpit of the warship, the 3 hall masters looked at each other and remained silent. After a while, the 3rd hall master spoke first. He asked, "First hall master, the 3 deputy hall masters do not know Su Juechen. No one knows where Su Juechen went. Should we continue south and return? Or should we search in the Chaos Sea?" The first hall master thought for a while and said, "There is no need to search in the Chaos Sea. The Chaos Sea is so vast. Where can we find him? Let's head south and return the way we came. Also, inform the 2nd hall master to personally lead a group of elite divine kings to patrol the border between the Chaos Sea and the mainland. Maybe that Su Juechen is fast enough and the 2nd palace master has a chance to intercept him." The third palace master and the fourth palace master nodded to show that they had complied. Actually, everyone knew in their hearts that the first palace master was only doing his best and leaving the rest to fate. Are you counting on the second hall master to bring people to the border of the Chaos Sea? The chances of killing Su Juechen were too slim. Did they expect to catch up with Su Juechen on the way to the south on a warship? The chances of that happening were very small. Simply put, this matter might be left unsettled. After all, the first palace master had only made a promise before. He would make the Shura God Emperor the sixth lord of the Qing Temple. However, this matter had not been announced to the public yet. Azura God Emperor the sixth palace master? He hadn't received everyone's approval yet. To everyone, do you still have doubts about the Azura God Emperor? They didn't have any deep feelings for each other. Were they counting on the Shangqing Temple to come out in full force? It was also unrealistic to avenge him at all costs. Deep in the Chaos Sea, more than 2 million miles ahead of Grand Hall's flagship, a dazzling ray of divine light? It was speeding across the surface of the sea toward the south. Within this ray of golden divine light, there was a tall figure. It was Ji Tianxing. No, it should be Su Juechen. Was it just as first palace master had guessed? He had achieved his goal, so he naturally wouldn't stay in the Chaos Sea. The most important thing was to leave the Chaos Sea and stay away from danger. Even though the gate of heavenly Tao in the Evernight Sea region and the budding eternal flame had left a deep impression in his mind, he had never seen it before. If there was a chance in the future, he would definitely return to the eternal Night Sea region to explore the mystery of the gate of heavenly Tao. But not now. His previous contact and observation had made him understand. Even if he had some mysterious connection with the gate of heavenly Tao, he might not have the strength to ignite the eternal fire now. If he rashly touched the gate of heavenly Tao, he wouldn't end up any better than the Azura God Emperor. In the end, he had to thank First Palace Master and the Gate of Heavenly Tao for being able to successfully kill the Azura God Emperor on this trip to the Chaos Sea. If First Palace Master hadn't been so overbearing and forced the Azura God Emperor to open the Gate of Heavenly Tao, the Azura God Emperor wouldn't have been so severely injured. It was precisely because the Azura God Emperor's strength had plummeted and he was being chased by 2 God Emperor level sea beasts that Ji Tianxing had the opportunity to kill him completely. If the Azura God Emperor was at his peak, Ji Tianxing would probably only be able to destroy his divine body at most. It would be very difficult to kill him. After all, every God Emperor level powerhouse was a supreme existence that looked down on the world. How could they die so easily? Ji Tianxing pondered silently as he hurried on his way. This was still the depths of the Chaos Sea. He would need to continue flying south for more than a month before he could reach land. During this period he would have to experience many dangers, and there was even a chance that he would be attacked by the sea beast. After returning to land, he wouldn't stay in the Shangqing Temple's territory any longer. He would continue east, pass through unknown lands, and enter the territory of the next temple to seek revenge on the other god emperors. Only after I kill the god of the underworld Dao Xingyun and Lu Zhiyang will I have my revenge. At that time I will return to the Evernight Sea and explore the mysteries of the Gate of Heavenly Tao and Eternal Life. With this in mind, Ji Tianxing had already determined his next plan. Of course, there was one more thing that he had to do as soon as possible. That was, to refine the Azura God Emperor's divine spark fragment as soon as possible. After he refined the Azura God Emperor's divine spark fragment, not only would he be able to absorb the Azura God Emperor's power and divine laws, but he would also be able to obtain the memories of his divine soul. He believed that the Azura God Emperor was in contact with the other 3 God Emperors and should be more aware of each other's recent situation. After flying for a while, Ji Tianxing took out the God-slaying battleship, and the White Dragon drove the battleship. He stayed in the battleship, took out the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda, and entered the distorted spacetime to refine the Azura God Emperor's divine spark fragment. Time passed quietly. Ji Tianxing was immersed in his cultivation. He was completely focused and had no distractions. The White Dragon didn't disappoint his master, and focused on driving the battleship to the south. He was well aware of the dangers of the Chaos Sea, and knew that he would encounter danger along the way, so he remained vigilant and on guard with all his might. After Ji Tianxing became a God Emperor, he spent a lot of time and effort, and reached a 3-year agreement with the beasts in exchange for many refining materials to upgrade the Burial of Heaven sword to Emperor grade. As for the god-slaying battleship, it was still a supreme grade king grade item, and couldn't reach the god emperor grade. Therefore the god-slaying battleship's speed couldn't be compared to Ji Tianxing's. This also caused Ji Tianxing's speed to unknowingly slow down. Something that no one knew and no one could predict had happened. The distance between the Lord Hallmaster's battleship and Ji Tianxing's battleship was constantly shrinking. Judging from the speed at which the distance between the two sides was shrinking, there was no need to wait for Ji Tianxing to leave the Chaos Sea before the Lord Hallmaster's battleship caught up. Chapter 46-35. 5 days had passed. Bai Long controlled the god-slaying battleship and sped through the Chaos Sea. He encountered many dangerous traps and was also attacked by sea beasts several times. If the god-slaying battleship was an emperor-level divine artifact, he would not be afraid of those traps and sea beasts at all. However, the god-slaying battleship was only a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact. Bai Long was naturally extra careful. When he encountered those traps and dangerous areas, he would control the battleship to avoid them in advance. When he encountered the attacks of sea beasts, he would also control the battleship to avoid them as much as possible. If he really could not shake off the pursuit of those sea beasts, he would also control the divine artifact to counterattack. Just like that, 7 days passed without any danger. The distance between the god-slaying battleship and the Lord Paladin's ship was still closing. At noon on the 8th day, the god-slaying battleship faced a new danger. This time it was not a trap or an attack by sea beast. Instead, it was an exceptionally dazzling divine light that came from the Chaos Sea. It contained a terrifying power that could penetrate everything. Swish! That divine light descended from the sky and locked onto the god-slaying battleship. The beam of light was extremely fast. When Bai Long sensed the danger and reacted, the beam of light was already very close to the god-slaying battleship. At such a close distance, it was almost impossible for the god-slaying battleship to dodge the attack of the divine light. Bai Long also did not have time to dodge or resist. He could only activate the god-slaying battleship's power and form the strongest defensive shield. Boom! Crack! In the next moment, the dazzling red beam of light hit the god-slaying battleship, producing an earth-shattering sound. The god-slaying battleship's defensive shield was shattered into pieces on the spot. Fragments of divine light filled the sky. The divine light illuminated the surrounding tens of thousands of miles. The sea also stirred up huge waves that spread in all directions. The god-slaying battleship had been strengthened by Ji Tianxing many times and had long reached the peak of an emperor-level divine artifact. However, this divine light was clearly cast by an emperor-level expert. Its power far exceeded the range that an emperor-level divine artifact could withstand. Accompanied by cracking sounds, the right string of the god-slaying battleship began to crack, forming a huge hole. Countless metal fragments flew with the wind and scattered on the sea surface, shining with divine light. Under the huge impact, the god-slaying battleship was also moved dozens of kilometers away and almost capsized in the Chaos Sea. After suffering such a violent impact and such serious damage, the soldiers inside the warship had long been awakened. Everyone was filled with anxiety and panic. They did not know what had happened. White Dragon was still able to remain calm. He quickly stabilized the warship and accelerated towards the south. As for the repair of the damaged areas of the warship, it could only be done when it was safe in the future. At the same time, White Dragon quickly used his divine sense to report the attack to his master. In fact, 7.5 days had passed in the outside world. Ji Tianxing had already been in closed-door cultivation in the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda for an entire year. In the past year he had already refined the Shura God Emperor's quintessence shard. Not only had he absorbed an incomparably vast amount of divine energy, he had even refined several hundred types of divine Tao laws. Presently, the divine Tao laws he'd grasped had already arrived at over 2,500. If there were 3,000 great Taoists in the world, he had already grasped more than 80% of them. Although his cultivation level was still at the initial God Emperor realm, he had still condensed 2 Taoist rhymes. However, after refining the Shura God Emperor's quintessence shard, the speed and progress of condensing his 3rd Taoist rhyme had increased. He estimated that after another 2 to 3 years of closed-door cultivation, he would be able to condense his 3rd Taoist rhyme. However, just as Ji Tianxing was about to cultivate his 3rd Taoist rhyme as soon as possible, He sensed that the god-slaying battleship had been severely damaged. After all, the god-slaying battleship was a divine weapon that he had nurtured for many years. It was connected to his mind and soul. Without waiting for White Dragon's divine sense to inform him, he already knew that something had happened. Swoosh. When White Dragon informed him, he had already ended his cultivation. He left the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and returned to the god-slaying battleship. He was about to head to the control room to ask White Dragon what had happened and how the god-slaying battleship was damaged. At that moment, a dark blue beam of light shot out from the chaotic fog in front of him. It shot down from the sky. Although this beam of light was of a different color, it was also locked onto the god-slaying battleship. Moreover, it was also shot by a god emperor. It was extremely powerful. It looked like the god-slaying battleship, which had been slowed down due to its damage, would not be able to dodge this beam of light. It was about to be hit by the dark blue beam of light again. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing acted in time. He formed a sword with his right hand and instantly slashed out a 1,000-feet-long golden sword beam. Boom. Crack. Before the dark blue beam of light could hit the god-slaying battleship, the 1,000-feet-long giant sword collided with it first. There was a loud explosion that shook the 9 heavens. Instantly, the 1,000-feet-long giant sword and the dark blue beam of light shattered into countless shards of divine light. The violent shockwave sent the god-slaying battleship flying more than 10 miles away. However, the dark blue beam of light did not hit the battleship. Hence, the battleship was not damaged again. White Dragon saw the 1,000-feet-long giant golden sword appear and knew that his master had made a move. He was instantly relieved. Before he could report the situation to his master's divine sense voice transmission rang out in his mind. There are 2 God Emperor level sea beasts lying in ambush here. They are not something you can deal with. Master will take care of them. Focus on repairing the battleship and calming the frightened soldiers. There is no need to worry about anything else. After hearing his master's divine sense voice transmission, White Dragon was shocked. Only now did he realize that there were 2 God Emperor level sea beasts lying in ambush here. However, his master's tone and attitude were very calm, which made him feel even more at ease. He hurriedly replied, "Understood." At this moment, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and drew the god-slaying battleship back into his body. This way, no matter how much he fought with the 2 God Emperor level sea beasts, it would not affect the god-slaying battleship or the soldiers on board. White Dragon could also first calm the frightened soldiers and then think of a way to repair the battleship. Swish. In the blink of an eye, only Ji Tianxing was left on the gloomy surface of the Chaos Sea. The surface of the Chaos Sea around him was still surging with waves and divine light flying everywhere. In the chaos fog above his head, a whirlpool rose into the sky, flashing with red and blue divine light. Ji Tianxing stood on the surface of the chaotic sea as he looked up at the gloomy sky that surged with wind and clouds, and then he shouted angrily in a low voice. "Which vile being actually dares to obstruct me here, and you're even hiding and not showing yourself?" In fact, he knew very well that there were only a few God Emperor level sea beasts circling this area of the sea. Previously, the 4 God Emperor level sea beasts had joined forces with Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin to attack the fleet of the Shangqing Temple and engage in a fierce battle with the Temple Masters. Logically speaking, those God Emperor level sea beasts should have been more or less injured and should be hiding to heal their wounds. Why didn't they stop and ambush his battleship again? Chapter 46-36. Ji Tianxing's deafening voice reverberated between heaven and earth. The 2 sea beasts hiding in the chaotic fog didn't respond, nor did they show themselves. Seeing that they didn't respond, Ji Tianxing didn't waste any more time with them and continued to fly south. The 2 sea beasts naturally wouldn't let him go. They also traveled through the chaotic fog and followed Ji Tianxing to the south. In truth, it wasn't that they didn't dare to show themselves, but that they were still puzzled and were discussing secretly. Of these 2 God Emperor level sea beasts, one was a giant black-brown scorpion that was 10,000 feet long and had a pair of wide scarlet wings. It was called the Scorpion Ancestor. The other was a giant dark blue fish that was 30,000 feet long. Its body was like a whale or a kuan, and it had a terrifying bloody mouth and 2 pairs of wings. Its name was Xianxia. Like the Scorpion Ancestor, it was an ancient creature that was born 100,000 years ago. The sea region closest to the Evernight Sea region was their territory. If they continued south for 5 days, they would leave their territory. 2 of the 4 God Emperor level sea beasts that attacked the Xianxia temple fleet and besieged the Lord Hallmaster were among them. The other 2 God Emperor level sea beasts were the Blue Dragon and Yubingxin. As for the 2 sea beasts that besieged the Azura God Emperor and joined forces with Ji Tianxing to kill the Azura God Emperor, they were the lords of the Southern Sea region. The Scorpion Ancestor and Xianxia had left the Evernight Sea region a few days ago and returned to their own territories. However, they received reports from their subjects that an unfamiliar warship was speeding through their territory, injuring many sea beasts and their subjects along the way. When the Scorpion Ancestor and Xianxia heard the news, they hurried over to intercept and kill the unfamiliar warship. In their minds, even the Xianxia temple fleet had been destroyed by them. Although they couldn't defeat the Lord Hallmasters of the Xianxia temple, anyone else apart from the Xianxia temple would be courting death if they dared to act so presumptuously here. Hence, Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor arrived at this sea region. After discovering the god-slaying battleship, they launched an attack without hesitation. Seeing that the Scorpion Ancestors' first attack had managed to seriously injure the god-slaying warship, the 2 of them felt extremely relaxed. In fact, they even felt contempt for the Scorpion Ancestor. Xianxia used his divine ability again and released a second attack, preparing to sink the god-slaying battleship in one fell swoop. They never expected that a desolate race god emperor would suddenly appear from the god-slaying battleship, blocking Xianxia's attack. Not only that, the desolate race god emperor had also put away the god-slaying battleship and shouted into the chaos fog, forcing them to appear. Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor immediately turned alert. They secretly sized up the desolate race's god emperor, trying to figure out his background and origins. At a glance, they were certain that the young desolate race god emperor was definitely not the temple lord of the Xianxia divine palace. From the 1st Hallmaster to the 5th Hallmaster, they had met all of them. Even for the newly appointed 6th Hallmaster, they had not seen his true appearance, but the 6th Hallmaster was already dead. Hence, this desolate race god emperor was definitely not the temple lord of the Xianxia divine palace. However, Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor had a nagging feeling that this person definitely had something to do with the Xianxia divine palace. If not, how could it be such a coincidence that the desolate race god emperor had appeared when the Xianxia divine palace was exploring the Chaos Sea? Other than this, Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor were unable to find any more clues from their research. Without being able to figure out the desolate race god emperor's identity and origins, Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor were in no hurry to make a move. They decided to continue observing. Just like that, another day passed. No matter how fast Ji Tianxing traveled, the Chaos Sea was the sea beast race's home ground. Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor could be said to be well endowed by nature, like fish in water. As such, Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor continued to follow closely behind him. There was no way to shake them off. Seeing that Ji Tianxing had been traveling for an entire day, his speed was nothing special. In terms of strength, there was nothing special about him. As such, Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor's wariness gradually relaxed. They no longer had any concerns and finally joined forces to cast spells, besieging Ji Tianxing. Swoosh, swoosh. In the chaos fog, a dazzling divine light lit up again. Inky blue and crimson red divine light condensed into more than 100 gigantic light blades. Mixed with wind, fire and lightning that filled the sky, they poured down like a torrential flood. From the looks of it, Ji Tianxing was about to be drowned by the sky full of saber beams, sword shadows, wind, fire and lightning. As for Ji Tianxing, he was constantly on guard against the attacks of the 2 sea beasts, so he naturally did not fall for it. He used his teleportation technique in a timely manner, traversing 20,000 miles in a step, escaping the center of the saber beams, sword shadows, wind, fire and lightning. Following that, he conjured the burial of Heaven's sword and brandished hundreds of dazzling sword beams to meet the dozens of gigantic light blades. Bam! 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 The sacred golden sword beams collided with the dozens of light blades in the sky, creating a series of muffled explosions. Violent shockwaves mixed with countless fragments of divine light spread in all directions. After the divine light filled the sky, Ji Tianxing took another step and retreated 20,000 miles, escaping the danger. He turned to face Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor. The two sides were 20,000 miles apart, facing each other across the sky. Scorpion Ancestor originally wanted to use his super-fast speed to rush to Ji Tianqing's front and join forces with Kun Sha to surround Ji Tianqing and attack him. Unexpectedly, Ji Tianqing did not give them a chance at all. Left with no choice, Kun Sha and Scorpion Ancestor could only fight side by side. They once again unleashed destructive spells to attack Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing was fighting against two alone. Even if the opponent's strength was 2 levels higher than his, he was not afraid at all. Absolute shadows of 10 directions. Facing two powerful enemies, he did not hesitate to use his ultimate skill to create 9 doppelgangers. The 9 doppelgangers, including him, had a total of 10 figures. They all had the strength and power of a god emperor. They formed a formation in the sky and surrounded Kun Sha and Scorpion Ancestor. Such an absurd change caused the Kun Shark and the Scorpion Ancestor to be dumbstruck and filled with astonishment. While they were stunned, Ji Tianqing and his 9 doppelgangers attacked at the same time. They waved their swords and used hundreds of Sword Dao ultimate skills and all kinds of divine powers. The sky-covering sword light and colorful divine powers enveloped an area of 20,000 miles, including Kun Sha and Scorpion Ancestor. The two sea beasts had no choice but to dispel their underestimation. They used their full strength to fight back seriously and cautiously. Boom boom boom. Boom boom boom. The divine powers from both sides clashed fiercely in the sky, creating deafening explosions that did not disappear for a long time. Kun Sha and Scorpion Ancestor originally thought that they could easily defeat Ji Tianqing and even kill him. However, as time passed, the more they fought, the more fearful they became. They even had the thought of retreating. Ji Tianqing's true combat strength was far beyond his realm. He was almost on par with them who had condensed 4 Taoist rhymes. Moreover, Ji Tianqing had the help of his 9 doppelgangers. He had an advantage in numbers. Kun Sha and Scorpion Ancestor were already injured and their strength had decreased. Now they were besieged by Ji Tianqing and his 9 doppelgangers. The two sides exchanged hundreds of blows, but they couldn't gain the slightest advantage. They could only fight on par with Ji Tianqing and there was no clear victor. Chapter 46-37. Seeing that Ji Tianqing was so powerful, Kun Sha and the Scorpion Ancestor could not help but be shocked and anxious. At the same time, they both regretted it. If they had known that this person's combat strength was so powerful, they would not have taken the initiative to provoke him. Anyway, this person did not invade their territory and showed signs of wantonly slaughtering the sea beasts. He was just passing by this sea. If they pretended not to notice and pretended that nothing had happened, they would not be in such a predicament. Now, even if they wanted to retreat, they might not be able to do so. Ji Tianqing and his 9 clones besieged them. Although they did not have the upper hand, they would not give up easily, let alone let them escape. Kun Sha and the Scorpion Ancestor fought fiercely while discussing how to retreat unscathed. After discussing for a while, they could not think of an effective method, so they could only fight and retreat. Ji Tianqing was heading south, while Kun Sha and the Scorpion Ancestor were chasing from the north. Naturally, they retreated to the north. As time passed, the battlefield of the two sides also shifted to the north. 30,000 kilometers, 50,000 kilometers, 80,000 kilometers. Ji Tianqing had the help of his 9 clones and was not afraid of Kun Sha and the Scorpion Ancestor at all. However, his clones could not exist for a long time. At most, they would last for an hour before naturally dissipating. Before his clones dissipated, both sides had already moved 250,000 kilometers to the north. Ji Tianqing suddenly thought of something and a trace of worry flashed across his heart. Since these two sea beasts have come here, the hall masters of the Xianxia temple should also be on their way back. Unless they have other missions, they will not stay in the Chaos Sea. Otherwise, they might have to pass by this place. If he kept flying south, he could still maintain a certain distance from the hall masters of the Xianxia temple. However, if he and the two sea beasts moved north, they would close the distance between them and the hall masters. It was very likely that they would encounter them in advance. Therefore, Ji Tianqing was vigilant and planned to stop fighting. However, Kun Sha and Scorpion Ancestor were very astute. When they saw Ji Tianqing's 9 doppelgangers disappear, they immediately became spirited and erupted with even stronger combat strength. The divine ability that Kid executed just now was too strange. He was actually able to create 9 clones, and all of them possessed the combat strength of a god emperor. That's too terrifying. Now, all of his clones have dissipated and he's the only one left. Let's see how he fends off our attacks. As far as I know, as long as it's that kind of powerful divine ability, there will be different degrees of backlash. After the casting of the divine ability, the user's combat strength will plummet. That's right. He couldn't defeat us even after summoning 9 doppelgangers. Now that his doppelgangers have dissipated, his strength will be greatly reduced. No wonder he had the intention to retreat and escape just now. Now is the best time to kill him, we can't let him go. Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor discussed through voice transmissions as they sped up their attacks, besieging Zhi Tianxing. Without the help of his 9 clones, Zhi Tianxing's combat strength naturally plummeted. But Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor guessed wrongly. His Absolute Shadow's divine ability would not have a backlash at all. In reality, his combat strength did not have any obvious changes from before, and there was no backlash or damage. But Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor's psychological influence was too strong. Their overflowing confidence could indeed affect their combat strength, suppressing Zhi Tianxing until he was constantly forced to retreat. Therefore, the battlefield of both sides began to shift south again. Reality proved that Zhi Tianxing's worries were very reasonable and were quickly verified. Both sides fought for 4 hours in a stalemate, constantly shifting south, but the speed was very slow. Just as both sides' battle reached the most critical juncture and victory was about to be decided, a dazzling divine light sped over from the north. Whoosh! That was a dark golden divine light that flew out of the darkness, streaking across the night sky as fast as lightning, rapidly approaching the battlefield. When the divine light was only tens of thousands of miles away from the battlefield, one could vaguely see a figure that was thousands of feet long in the divine light. That was not a sea beast, but a majestic battleship with a sacred appearance. Without a doubt, that was the battleship of the Grand Hallmaster of the Shangqing Temple. In the cockpit of the battleship, the Grand Hallmaster, Third Hallmaster and Fourth Hallmaster were standing together, looking at the night sky in front of the battleship, discussing with solemn expressions. We are still hundreds of thousands of miles away, but we can see the divine light shining in front of us. There are all kinds of divine arts flashing. I wonder who is fighting here. Judging from the brilliance of the divine light and the scale of the divine arts, it is most likely God Emperor powerhouses fighting. Otherwise it would not be so conspicuous. This is strange. What God Emperor powerhouses can there be in the Chaos Sea? Other than us, there are only a few God Emperor level sea beasts left. Could it be that they have an internal strife and are killing each other? The Third Hallmaster and Fourth Hallmaster discussed for a while, feeling puzzled. At this moment, the First Palace Master's sudden words stunned the 2 Palace Masters, and their spirits shook. Don't forget, other than us and the few sea beasts, there is still a God Emperor. Hearing the Grand Hallmaster's reminder, the 2 Hallmasters' eyes lit up and they became excited. I understand. The Grand Hallmaster is talking about that guy. It's very possible. That darn desolate race God Emperor must have had a conflict with the sea beasts. If it's really that desolate race God Emperor and he is fighting the sea beasts, it means that they are not in cahoots. The Grand Hallmaster glanced at the 2 of them and said in a deep voice, "It's too early to jump to such an arbitrary conclusion. Even if that desolate race God Emperor is fighting the sea beasts, it does not mean that there is no relationship between them. Maybe it's an internal strife?" After the Third Hallmaster and Fourth Hallmaster heard this, they nodded their heads in agreement. That makes sense. The Grand Hallmaster is wise and far-sighted. Just as the 3 Hallmasters were conversing, the battleship had already flown 100,000 miles across the night sky and arrived near the battlefield. When it was 30,000 miles away from the battlefield, the battleship slowed down and circled in the night sky. At this moment, the 3 Hallmasters could clearly see the situation on the battlefield. Although the battlefield in front of them was very chaotic, with the sky filled with divine technique light and colorful divine light, the 3 Hallmasters were still able to discern it clearly. However, the 3 Hallmasters could still tell that there were 2 gigantic and ferocious-looking sea beasts attacking a desolate race god the Arch. It's him. It's that bastard Su Juechen from the 3 Mountain Hall. The 3rd Hallmaster and 4th Hallmaster saw the desolate race figure clearly and instantly identified him. Immediately, their eyes flashed as their bodies emitted intense killing intent. It was not only the two of them, even the Grand Hallmaster's eyebrows pricked up. A sinister sneer suffused on his lips as a cold beam flashed in his eyes. It's really a case of searching high and low only to find him by sheer luck. We did not search for him in the Chaos Sea, but we met him on the way back. Furthermore, it was Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor who stopped him. Her. He is destined to be killed by us. Could this be heaven's will? Chapter 46-38. Seeing Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor besieging Zhou, the three Hall Masters were pleasantly surprised. Originally, they no longer had much hope of killing Zhou and avenging the sixth Hall Master. They did not expect to encounter Zhou on their way back to Xianxia Temple after leaving the Chaos Sea. This was definitely a pleasant surprise. Even so, the three Hall Masters did not act rashly. Instead, they observed the situation and looked for a suitable opportunity to strike. The first Hall Master waved his hand and cast a spell. He controlled the warship to enter an invisible state and quietly float in the night sky. Rumble. 30,000 miles away, Xianxia was still fighting and retreating. He used all kinds of supernatural powers and ultimate skills to resist the besiegement of Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor. Xianxia was exhausted from resisting, but he was not injured. However, he was besieged by Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor and could not escape. As time passed, Xianxia's divine power was constantly depleted, and his combat power was gradually weakening. As he resisted the besiegement of Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor, he gradually felt powerless and had no choice but to continue retreating to the south. At this time, Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor finally seized the opportunity to pursue Xianxia even more fiercely. The momentum of their attacks was also more violent. Xianxia's decline was even more obvious. In order to preserve his strength, the momentum of his retreat was even more urgent. This was not only because of Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor's attack, but also because Xianxia had long noticed the arrival of the first Hall Master's warship. When the first Hall Master's warship arrived, he only caught a glimpse and did not see the warship's full appearance clearly. However, Xianxia only needed to see that it was a warship in the divine light to guess the origin and identity of the warship. Now there was no one else other than Xianxia Temple's warship sailing in the Chaos Sea. Xianxia Temple's fleet was almost completely annihilated. It seemed that only the first Hall Master's warship was preserved. Therefore, the identity of that divine warship was obvious. Xianxia was not afraid of Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor. He had already guessed that the Lord Hall Master's ship had arrived, and several Hall Masters of the Xianxia Temple were eyeing them covetously. Under such circumstances, how could he possibly fight Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor with all his might? Wouldn't that be cutting off his escape route and giving the Temple Masters of the Xianxia Temple a chance to take advantage of him? The warship was hidden under the chaotic fog, overlooking the battlefield. As Xianxia, Xianxia, and Scorpion Ancestor moved south, the battleship also gradually moved south. The three palace masters had been keeping a close eye on the battlefield. When they saw Xianxia had the intention to retreat, they sped up and fled towards the south. The warship also sped up to follow. Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor were not foolish. Of course, they could sense the existence of the battleship. They were no stranger to that battleship. Back then, it had led an army of sea beasts to besiege the fleet of the Xianxia Temple. They also maintained vigilance towards that God-Emperor level battleship. The fleet of the Xianxia Temple was almost completely annihilated. Only that battleship survived. With Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor's wisdom, they could naturally guess that it was the Lord Hall Master's ship of the Xianxia Temple. There were also several Hall Masters on board. They had to weigh the pros and cons. What did the Xianxia Temple want to do? Why were they hiding and spying on the sidelines but not making a move? The Hall Masters of the Xianxia Temple were naturally not good people. They would definitely take the opportunity to cause trouble. But it was still unknown who they would make a move on. Therefore, while Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor were chasing Xianxia, they also maintained vigilance. They did not dare to use their full strength. In this way, the three parties maintained vigilance against each other in the process of moving south. Under the situation where Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor did not dare to pursue with full strength, the pressure on Xianxia was greatly reduced, and he had a chance to escape. He took the opportunity to use the so close, yet so far skill and instantly teleported 100,000 miles, temporarily shaking off Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor, as well as the Lord Hallmaster's ship that was following closely. However, Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor had a unique advantage in the Chaos Sea. They also used their ultimate skills and used the power of the Chaos Fog to travel 90,000 miles in an instant and catch up with Xianxia. Only the Lord Hallmaster's ship relied on flying at full speed to gradually catch up with Xianxia and the two sea beasts. Seeing that the Lord Hallmaster's ship was so persistent and following closely, it was obvious that he wanted to kill them. Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor finally hesitated. They could not make up their minds and could not guess what the lords of the Xianxia Temple wanted to do. However, the two of them discussed privately and agreed that the Xianxia Temple was more likely to target them. After all, both sides had previously fought in the depths of the Chaos Sea and had formed a grudge. As for the lords of the Xianxia Temple, they were the same as the Desolate Race's God Emperor. They were also the Desolate Race's God Emperor, so they should have some connection. However, Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor could not guess why the lords of the Xianxia Temple were following them from afar and did not help. They didn't know what kind of grudge or conflict existed between the sect masters and Xianxia. However, they could not continue their pursuit as it would definitely put them in an even more dangerous situation. Hence, Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor gradually slowed down and changed their direction. They gradually gave up on pursuing Xianxia and left the battlefield. At this moment, the Lord Hallmaster's ship accelerated and caught up. Upon seeing this scene, Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor were somewhat shocked and anxious. They subconsciously believed that they were about to retreat, causing the Lord Hallmaster's ship to accelerate its pursuit. This proved that the targets of the lords of the Xianxia Temple were the two of them. However, when they sped up to escape, they realized that the Lord Hallmaster's ship did not chase after them. Instead, it went straight for the Desolate Race's God Emperor. Upon seeing this scene, Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor heaved a sigh of relief. It looks like we were overthinking things. Thankfully, they are not targeting us or it would be troublesome. Strange, they are both the Desolate Race's God Emperor. Shouldn't they be in the same group? Who knows? Let's hide by the side and observe the situation. Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor hid in the Chaos Fog. As they followed Xianxia and the Lord Hallmaster's ship, they communicated via voice transmissions. As such, the situation on the battlefield changed. Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor went from being participants to being bystanders. As for the bystanders from before, the lords of the Xianxia Temple had become participants. The Lord Hallmaster's ship accelerated and caught up to Xianxia in a short span of 100 seconds. Zhou. The Lord Hallmaster, who was dressed in a purple robe and wearing a divine crown, flew out of the battleship with a scepter in hand. He stood at the top of the battleship and stared at Xianxia in front of him. He bellowed angrily, "Zhou Xian, your time of death has come. Don't even think of escaping. Surrender." The dull sound waves spread across tens of thousands of miles, reverberating between the heavens and earth. The Lord Hallmaster's body emitted a terrifying killing intent as he locked onto Xianxia's aura. His eyes flashed with a sharp cold beam. Xianxia sped up without looking back. When he heard the Lord Hallmaster's shout, he thought to himself, "Although I killed the Azura God Emperor, is there such a deep relationship between the Xianxia Temple and the Azura God Emperor? Why are they so determined to avenge the Azura God Emperor?" Chapter 46-39. Of course, Xianxia did not believe that the Xianxia Temple had deep feelings for the Azura God Emperor. After coming to the Star of Origin for so long, he had a good understanding of the Desolate Race. In all fairness, the Desolate Race was still very wary of other races. The reason why the Grand Palace Master stood out and wanted to kill him to avenge the Azura God Emperor could only be said to be a coincidence. If the Grand Palace Master and company had not coincidentally met him on their way back, he did not believe that the Grand Palace Masters would take the initiative to search for him. Although Xianxia had guessed this point, it was of no help to the current situation. Swoosh, swoosh. The battleship lit up with a dazzling divine light again. Two figures flew out and landed behind the Grand Palace Master. Xianxia looked back and saw that it was the third and fourth Palace Masters. The third and fourth Palace Masters did not shout at him. Instead they looked behind them and stared at the chaotic fog where Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor were hiding. They shouted loudly, "Xianxia, Scorpion Ancestor, even if you are hiding, you can't hide from my eyes. We will settle our scores in the future. Now this is a grudge between me and Zhou Xian. If you know what's good for you, leave this place immediately. If you dare to interfere in this matter, don't blame us for killing you both." Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor wanted to lurk by the side and spy on them. They wanted to find a suitable opportunity to strike. Compared to killing Zhou Xian, they wanted to kill the Grand Palace Masters of the Xianxia Temple. After all, the Xianxia Temple's power was deeply rooted and had a history of tens of thousands of years. In the past 30,000 years, the Xianxia Temple had sent the God Emperor many times to lead a large number of elite God Kings to explore the depths of the Chaos Sea. This posed a great threat to Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestors' territory. Both sides had fought many times and suffered tragic casualties. They had long formed a blood feud. It would have been better if the two palace masters had not shouted. Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor could still decide whether to attack or not based on the situation. Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor were both enraged after the two palace masters spoke in a forceful manner. "Damned bastard, who does he think he is? What's so great about Xianxia Temple? Over the past tens of thousands of years, haven't we slaughtered tens of thousands of elites? You want us to leave and not interfere in their feud with Zhou Xian? Impossible. Whatever the Xianxia Temple wants to do, we will stop and destroy it." Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor did not reveal themselves. They were still hiding in the chaotic fog as they discussed secretly. Seeing Scorpion Ancestor become more agitated the more he spoke, Xianxia hurriedly dissuaded, "Don't be agitated. Of course we can't let the bastards of Xianxia Temple succeed. We have to make them pay a price. However, we don't have to participate in the battle between them and Zhou Xian. We just need to reap the benefits." Scorpion Ancestor came back to his senses and hurriedly nodded, "That's right, I didn't think it through. Let's continue to watch the battle." Just as Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor were discussing secretly, the Palace Master had already attacked Xianxia. In the Palace Master's view, Zhou Xian had just fought with Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor. He was in a state where his divine power was greatly exhausted and had yet to recover. This was the best opportunity to kill him. He would never give Zhou Xian a chance to breathe and recover his divine power. Heavenly Wasteland Judgment. The Palace Master stood on the warship with his left hand behind his back and his right hand holding the scepter. He pointed at the dark night sky and then chopped down at Xianxia. Suddenly, in the dark night sky that was covered by chaotic fog, a holy golden light that was tens of thousands of feet long and could split heaven and earth lit up. It fell from the sky and chopped down fiercely. The golden light was like the scorching sun that dispelled the darkness. It was also like the sword of heavenly wasteland that fell from the sky to judge all evil. Before the golden light arrived, a terrifying pressure had already enveloped Xianxia, firmly suppressing him and making him unable to move. At this moment, Xianxia truly felt how terrifying the power of an upper state God Emperor was. With his current strength, he was still not strong enough to fight against the Palace Master. However, he could not sit still and wait for death. He could only draw on the power of the five elements world, hold the Sword of Burial of Heaven tightly with both hands and use his trump card. Sword of World Destruction. Xianxia roared angrily. Holding the Sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands, he fiercely chopped out a golden sword light that was tens of thousands of feet long to meet the heavenly wasteland judgment descending from the sky. Boom. Crack. The next moment, two dazzling golden lights collided in the night sky, producing a deafening explosion that shook the sea for tens of thousands of miles. The two golden lights collapsed at the same time, shattering into hundreds of thousands of pieces. They were like golden butterflies that blotted out the sky, fluttering in the violent waves of chi. The divine power shockwave produced by the explosion carried with it countless fragments of golden light, spreading out in all directions and covering an area of tens of thousands of miles. The surface of the chaotic sea that had just calmed down began to boil again. Huge waves that were tens of thousands of feet high surged, producing a loud noise that shook the heavens. The collision of these two golden lights was a battle between two peerless sovereigns. Its power was terrifying to the extreme. Only a god emperor expert was qualified to watch the battle from tens of thousands of miles away. If a god king expert was here, even if they were touched by the shockwaves, they would be smashed to smithereens. Accompanied by an earth-shaking explosion, a figure flew through the sky of fragments of golden light and drifted toward the south. Everyone thought that the first Hallmaster had used all his strength to execute the heavenly desolation judgment, and that he would definitely be able to kill Zhou Xian instantly. Even Xianxia and the Scorpion ancestor who were hidden in the chaotic fog thought so. They had fought with the first Hallmaster before, and they knew very well how terrifying his strength was. However, no one expected that the figure that drifted through the sky of fragments of golden light was actually Zhou Xian. Zhou Xian did not die. He was not killed by the golden light, and his divine body was still intact. Even though he was pushed back by the violent force and was sent flying tens of thousands of miles away. However, after he spat out a mouthful of blood, he was able to suppress his injuries and use the recoil force to speed up his escape to the south. Swish. In just a breath's time he had first flown tens of thousands of miles away. Then he used the ultimate technique, so close yet so far, and instantly teleported tens of thousands of miles away. This scene not only stunned the first Hallmaster, but also the third Hallmaster and the fourth Hallmaster. Even Xianxia and the Scorpion ancestor who were hiding in the chaotic fog were stunned and tongue-tied. By God! That guy is not dead. He's still alive and kicking? When the first Hallmaster of Xianxia Temple was besieged by the four of us, he also used the heavenly desolation judgment. At that time the two of us joined forces with the blue dragon to barely block it. Even then the two of us were slightly injured. Yes. The power of the heavenly desolation judgment is extremely terrifying, but Zhou Xian actually neutralized it. Even if he was seriously injured and spat out blood, as long as he's still alive, I find it incredible. Not only did that guy survive, but he also took the opportunity to escape. Chapter 4640. That's right. Xianxia took advantage of the fact that the three Hallmasters and the two sea beasts were still in a daze to use so close, yet worlds apart, to teleport 50,000 kilometers away. The three Hallmasters and the two sea beasts all thought that he would be killed instantly. Unexpectedly, not only did he survive, but he also maintained his mobility and took the opportunity to escape. In fact, he had a different way of thinking compared to Xianxia, Scorpion ancestor, and Blue Dragon when it came to neutralizing the heavenly wasteland judgment. The three god emperor level sea beasts only thought of how to defend themselves and prevent themselves from being injured. But reality proved that the three of them together could not completely block it. Xianxia and Scorpion ancestor were still injured. But Xianxia was different. He knew his own strengths and weaknesses. He definitely could not block the heavenly wasteland judgment. Therefore he used his strongest divine ability and used the Sword of Annihilation to resist the heavenly wasteland judgment. It was both a confrontation and a neutralization. This method was indeed more effective. The power of the Sword of Annihilation was comparable to the heavenly wasteland judgment. When the two collapsed at the same time, the heavenly wasteland judgment was neutralized. Even if some of the remaining power hit Xianxia, causing him to be seriously injured and even vomiting blood, it was not a serious injury. However, that injury was not serious enough to be considered a serious injury. Otherwise, wouldn't the celestial river body tempering secret art he had cultivated for countless years be useless? He used the recoil to retreat tens of thousands of kilometers away. He still had the strength to use so close, yet worlds apart, to escape 100,000 kilometers in an instant. So close, yet worlds apart was one of his last life-saving methods on the planet of origin. Whoosh. When Xianxia escaped 130,000 kilometers away, the three Hallmasters finally reacted and immediately began to pursue him. This time, in order to catch up to Xianxia as soon as possible, they did not even control the warship. The head Hallmaster waved his hand and shrunk the 1,000-meter-long warship into a speck of dust and put it back into his body. The three Hallmasters turned into streams of light and sped through the night sky, traveling 10,000 kilometers in an instant. Xianxia and Scorpion ancestor, who were hiding in the chaotic fog, also came back to their senses. They quickly sped up in the fog and chased after Xianxia and the three Hallmasters. No matter what, they couldn't miss this wonderful show. Zhou Xian, you damned bastard, I'll definitely kill you. The first palace master gritted his teeth angrily and cursed fiercely as he traveled at lightning speed. He originally thought that he could easily kill Zhou Xian. After all, his cultivation level was much higher than his opponent's. However, the result was a slap to his face, causing him to lose all face. Even if it wasn't for the sake of avenging the Shura God Emperor, he still wouldn't let Zhou Xian off just to save face. However, the third hall master and the fourth hall master, who were following closely behind him, had complicated expressions. After the two of them discussed secretly for a while, they said to the first hall master, "First hall master, I wonder if you have noticed a problem." "Lord hall master, that Zhou Xian is very problematic." The first hall master was in a fit of anger. All he cared about was how to chase up to Ji Tianxing and kill him. Hearing the two hall masters speaking in riddles, he naturally didn't have a pleasant expression. He said in a deep voice, "If there's a problem, just say it." The third hall master's expression stiffened. He didn't dare to keep them in suspense and said directly, "The divine power Zhou Xian used and the divine powers and spells he used seem to be different from ours." The fourth hall master added on, "I have a nagging feeling that his divine power and divine powers and spells don't seem to belong to our desolate race." After the two hall masters' reminder, the first hall master finally reacted. After frowning for a moment, he nodded slightly and said, "That's right. I also noticed this point. At first I thought he was from the desolate race. However, on careful thought, he isn't as simple as being from the desolate race. He seems to have some similarities with the Shura God Emperor." The third hall master immediately followed up and reminded him, "Since he is from the desolate race and he seems to be similar to the Shura God Emperor, then why does he look like a member of the desolate race? Also, whether he is the Tri-Mountain Hall's Zhou Xian or not is still a question." The first hall master fell silent for a moment before he finally analyzed the crux of the problem. "I suspect that guy is not the Tri-Mountain Hall's Zhou Xian, but a desolate god emperor. And he only possessed Zhou Xian and used Zhou Xian's appearance to do things, which made everyone lower their guard." The third hall master and the fourth hall master hurriedly nodded in agreement and expressed their opinions. "That's right. The first hall master's analysis is very reasonable. Only this can explain why Zhou Xian seems to be a different person after disappearing for 10,000 years. It's not difficult to understand why that guy attacked the Shura God Emperor. It's because he is not Zhou Xian, but a member of the desolate race like the Shura God Emperor. There must be an old grudge between the two." As the hall master of the Xianxia Divine Hall, his wisdom and insight were unquestionable. Previously they did not notice Ji Tianxing, but now that the first hall master had exchanged a blow with Ji Tianxing, they could tell something was amiss. Chapter 46-41. The first hall master's attack was domineering and unreasonable. Another heavenly desolation judgment came down. Not only was Ji Tianxing sent flying, but he also spurted blood from his 7 orifices as his body shattered. When he fell from the sky and smashed into the chaos sea, his tall and burly body shattered into more than 30 pieces on the spot. That was because the divine body's endurance had reached its limit. That was why it was shattered by the impact. After all, he was using Zhou Xian's body. It was already very difficult for an 8th-level divine king divine body to last until now before it shattered. After his body shattered, Ji Tianxing's divinity flew out. It passed through the huge waves of the Chaos Sea and sped toward the south. In order to get away from the first hall master temporarily, he had no choice but to exhaust a huge amount of divine power to use the so close, yet worlds apart technique again. Swoosh! With a flash of divine light, Ji Tianxing teleported 100,000 miles away, distancing himself from the first hall master. The first hall master had just retrieved his scepter when he saw Ji Tianxing being smashed into pieces by the heavenly desolation judgment and falling into the chaos sea. He was feeling smug. He originally thought that Ji Tianxing was definitely going to die this time. However, he did not expect that Ji Tianxing's divinity would be safe and sound even though his injuries were so severe. He actually escaped again. Damn it! The first hall master shouted angrily. He had no choice but to continue chasing with his scepter. The third hall master and the fourth hall master were slightly slower. They followed closely behind the first hall master for 20,000 miles before they sped up. As for Kun Sha and the Scorpion Ancestor, they were still 40,000 miles away. They hid in the chaos fog and chased relentlessly. Ji Tianxing's divinity quickly returned to his original body after escaping for more than 100,000 miles. His divine body had been hiding in the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Now that the divinity returned to his body, he returned to his original appearance. A handsome and heroic appearance, a sacred and mysterious temperament, a hidden expert's aura. Compared to his appearance when he possessed Zhou Xian, the current him looked more like a god emperor. Ji Tianxing didn't show himself. He hid in the world of the Burial of Heaven and used his mind to control the Burial of Heaven. He cut through the night sky and sped south. Compared to the god-slaying battleship, the Sword of Burial of Heaven was much faster. After all, the Sword of Burial of Heaven was a genuine emperor-grade artifact. Both parties continued to chase in the depths of the Chaos Sea. They flew south. As time passed, the distance between them decreased. Even though the flying speed of the Burial of Heaven was very fast, the first Hallmaster's strength was outstanding. His speed was always one step ahead of Ji Tianxing. A day later, the great Hallmaster caught up with the Sword of the Burial of Heaven. He waved his scepter again and used all of his power to chop out two giant axes that could split the sky and earth. The giant golden axes that were hundreds of thousands of feet tall attacked the Sword of the Burial of Heaven from both sides, erupting with incomparable power that made one tremble in fear. Before the golden axes landed, the chaos fog had already surged. A huge gap was torn open in the dark night sky, and a huge ravine appeared on the surface of the Chaos Sea. The Sword of the Burial of Heaven's aura was locked. There was nowhere to hide and it was impossible to dodge. Although the first Hallmaster's divine ability was not as dazzling as the Heavenly Wasteland Judgment, its power was not weak at all. Moreover, the first Hallmaster did it on purpose to target Ji Tianxing. If he continued to use the Heavenly Wasteland Judgment, there was a 90% chance that Ji Tianxing would use the world-destroying sword again to cancel it out. However, he had slashed out two giant golden axes. Even if Ji Tianxing used the world-destroying sword again, he might not be able to cancel out the two giant golden axes. He would definitely be hit by one of the giant golden axes. At the critical moment, Ji Tianxing had to make a decisive choice. Should he resist passively or take the initiative to resolve it? The Sword of the Burial of Heaven was an emperor-level divine artifact. It should be able to block the two giant golden axes, but it would be damaged to a certain extent. As for the extent of the damage, Ji Tianxing was not sure. He was not willing to do anything that he was not confident in. The Sword of the Burial of Heaven was the only emperor-level divine artifact that he currently possessed. It could not be easily damaged. Therefore, he did not hesitate to take the initiative to meet the attack and resolve the first Hallmaster's attack. Swoosh! With a flash of white light, Ji Tianxing appeared above the Chaos Sea. He held the Sword of the Burial of Heaven tightly with both hands and instantly used two ultimate sword techniques. Blade of Space-Time. Sword of Daytime. On the left, a huge blazing white blade of light broke through the dark night sky and struck a giant golden axe. A cold light appeared on the right and instantly expanded to a radius of 50 kilometers. Like a resplendent golden sun, it swallowed the giant golden axe. Ji Tianxing did not use his trump card, the Sword of Annihilation. However, he had stimulated his potential and unleashed 120% of his strength. The power of these two ultimate skills was also very shocking. Boom, boom, crack. In the next moment, a deafening explosion erupted, resounding through the clouds. The blade of space-time was shattered by the giant golden axe. The huge golden sun was also pierced through and shattered into golden fragments. However, the two giant golden axes also dimmed, and their power was weakened by 70 to 80%. Even if the giant golden axe hit Ji Tianxing again, he used the Sword of the Burial of Heaven to block it. He only suffered some minor injuries and took the opportunity to retreat tens of thousands of kilometers away. Swish! Ji Tianxing once again used his ultimate skill, so close, yet worlds apart, and teleported another 100,000 miles away from the Grand Hallmaster. Just like that, the first Hallmaster furiously chased after him again. 2 days later, the first Hallmaster once again caught up with Ji Tianxing, who was fleeing on his sword, and attacked him again. Ji Tianxing used his ultimate skill again, blocking and dispelling the attack with all his might. He managed to escape unscathed. 4 days later, the same scene played out again. 7 days later. As time passed day by day, Ji Tianxing and the first Hallmaster's divine power was greatly depleted, and their strength was declining. Of course, the first Hallmaster was unscathed, but Ji Tianxing's injuries were worsening. Although he was only lightly injured every time, he could not recuperate or recover his divine power during the chase. In the long run, he would be seriously injured and killed by the first Hallmaster before he could escape the Chaos Sea. Both parties could foresee this situation. The first Hallmaster was full of anticipation, but Ji Tianxing was full of anxiety and worry. Finally, after half a month of chasing and fighting, the situation took a turn for the better. In the vast and boundless Chaos Sea, there was a huge whirlpool with a radius of 50,000 kilometers. It was like a bottomless abyss. When Ji Tianxing flew past this place, the first Hallmaster caught up with him and attacked him. He was already covered in wounds and looked miserable. His strength had also decreased to about 70%. After using the Sword of Destruction, he barely managed to dissolve the first Hallmaster's attack. However, he was sent flying by the aftershock and crashed into the huge whirlpool. The bottomless abyss-like whirlpool contained too many dangers and one had to be on guard. Under normal circumstances, Ji Tianxing would definitely ignore his injuries and try his best to stay away from the whirlpool to prevent himself from being swallowed. The first Hallmaster also thought so. He took the opportunity to chase him to the edge of the whirlpool and waited for him to fall into the trap. However, no one expected that not only did Ji Tianxing not resist the whirlpool's devouring, but he even accelerated and rushed in. Chapter 46-42. Zhoush. A dazzling golden light flashed, and Ji Tianxing's figure plunged into the dark vortex and quickly disappeared. It was as if he was swallowed by the vortex after being severely injured and unable to resist the vortex's devouring power. Standing at the edge of the vortex and holding the holy scepter, the Lord Hallmaster was dumbfounded. He had calculated and predicted several escape routes Ji Tianxing could take, but he did not expect that Ji Tianxing would be swallowed by the vortex. As a result, his subsequent plans fell through. Looking down at the bottomless abyss under his feet, his expression was very complicated. He was shocked, angry, and a little regretful. Damn it! That damn bastard, he would rather be swallowed by the Chaos Sea than fall into my hands. In fact, the Lord Hallmaster's mentality had changed during the half a month of chasing Ji Tianxing. He was no longer as angry as before and could not wait to kill Ji Tianxing. Through half a month of chasing and competing, he had long seen that this young foreign god emperor was stronger and more talented than the Shura god emperor. If the Four Great Temples deduction was not wrong, the ancient prophecy would come true. The Lord Hallmaster firmly believed that this handsome foreign god emperor was more like the person they were looking for, the chosen one. In fact, the Lord Hallmaster had quietly changed his mind. He did not intend to kill all of them. Instead, he intended to injure and capture Ji Tianxing, and then subdue him for the Xianxia Divine Palace. Anyway, everyone was still in the Chaos Sea, so they were not in a hurry to return to the Xianxia Temple. He would take Ji Tianxing and rush to the Evernight Sea again to try to ignite the eternal fire and open the gate of heavenly Tao. Unfortunately, as Ji Tianxing fell into the bottomless abyss, all of this went down the drain. The Lord Hallmaster would never jump into the bottomless abyss to track and capture Ji Tianxing. After all, this bottomless abyss with a radius of 50,000 miles in front of him was one of the most dangerous traps in the Chaos Sea. No one knew where the abyss led to or what dangers were hidden inside. In any case, from ancient times until now, none of the experts swallowed by the abyss had survived. The Lord Palace Master cherished his life more than anyone else, so why would he risk his life? A moment later, the third Palace Master and the fourth Palace Master arrived one after another. They also stopped at the edge of the bottomless abyss, not daring to take another step forward. The two temple masters stared at the abyss beneath their feet. After exchanging a glance, they looked at each other in dismay and shock filled their eyes. That god emperor was devoured by the abyss just like that? Although that fellow was heavily injured, he shouldn't have been swallowed by the vortex. First Hallmaster, could it be that your attack just now was too powerful, causing him to be severely injured and lose the ability to move? The two temple masters also found it inconceivable. At the same time, they felt a little regretful that Ji Tianxing had been swallowed by the abyss. In the past half a month, the two of them had basically been chasing after the Lord Hallmaster and Ji Tianxing. They had almost no chance to make a move. However, they had clearly seen every fight between the Lord Palace Master and Ji Tianqing. At first, they were also furious and couldn't wait to kill Ji Tianqing to avenge the Azura God Emperor. However, as the Lord Palace Master and Ji Tianqing fought again and again, they saw Ji Tianqing's valiant strength and endless trump cards. With his strength at the initial stage of the God Emperor, he could erupt with such terrifying fighting strength. Being chased by the Lord Palace Master, who was an upper stage God Emperor, and still being able to survive for half a month. What kind of shocking fighting strength was this? The third Palace Master and the fourth Palace Master were also shocked and gradually changed their views. They also privately discussed that Ji Tianqing was much stronger than the Azura God Emperor. If the four great temples guess was right and there really was a heaven's chosen one, then Ji Tianqing was more likely than anyone else. The two temple masters had also sent voice transmissions to the Lord Palace Master, reminding him not to accidentally kill Ji Tianqing. It would be best if they could capture Ji Tianqing and then go to the Evernight Sea region to try again. But now, the two temple masters' expectations and fantasies were dashed. The three temple masters stared blankly at the abyss and were silent for a long time. After 10 breaths, the Lord Palace Master said, "Although I didn't show mercy with his strength, it's impossible for me to seriously injure him and make him lose his ability to resist. He threw himself into the abyss in order to escape our pursuit." The fourth Palace Master frowned and said in a low voice, "Doesn't he know how dangerous this vortex is and that being swallowed by the vortex is certain death?" The third Palace Master shook his head and said calmly, "From ancient times until now, almost all those who were swallowed by the vortex died. But don't forget, only God Kings can be swallowed by the vortex, and no God Emperor has ever been swallowed by the vortex. Therefore, God Emperor level experts might not necessarily die if they were swallowed by the vortex, and there might be a chance of survival. But he thought that he would die if he fell into our hands. So he chose the lesser of two evils and would rather be swallowed by the vortex to fight for a chance of survival." The fourth Palace Master sighed helplessly and said with a bitter smile, "Sigh. If we knew he would be so unyielding, we would have negotiated with him and shown that we wouldn't kill him. Now that he has fallen into the bottomless abyss, we don't know if he's dead or alive and where he'll end up. We've missed this God Emperor of a foreign race, and I'm afraid it's impossible to find another God-chosen one who is more outstanding than him." The Lord Palace Master was more shrewd and his state of mind was more stable. "Forget it, this person has fallen into the bottomless abyss and we don't know if he's dead or alive. Let's end this matter here. We'll wait here for a few days and when the fifth Palace Master arrives, we'll return to the temple." The Lord Palace Master said indifferently and turned to leave the edge of the vortex. Then he took out the warship 10,000 miles away from the vortex and stepped into it. The third Palace Master and the fourth Palace Master sighed regretfully and turned to leave as well, returning to the warship. Next, the Lord Palace Master's warship hovered above the sea and waited for 6 days before the fifth Palace Master arrived. After the 4 Palace Masters met, the fourth Palace Master and the fifth Palace Master steered the warship and continued to fly south. The rest of the journey was peaceful and they didn't encounter any more twists and turns or dangers. A month later, the warship left the chaotic sea and returned to land. 2 months later, the Lord Palace Master's warship returned to the Xianxia Mystery Realm in a very low-key manner. Before everyone arrived at the Mystery Realm, the second Palace Master and several elders who stayed behind to guard the Mystery Realm received a message in advance and knew the process and result of this operation. Therefore, when the Lord Palace Master's warship returned to the Mystery Realm, the second Palace Master did not arrange for anyone to welcome it. After all, the Xianxia Temple's operation this time failed. Not only did they fail to explore the mystery of the Gate of Heaven, but they also lost nearly 3,000 elites and suffered heavy casualties. When they set off, they had a fleet of 6 warships. Now only one warship returned and it was all alone. If they welcomed it with great fanfare, wouldn't it make the Palace Masters feel so embarrassed? Chapter 46-43. Ji Tianqing naturally knew that the huge vortex with a radius of 50,000 kilometers was very rare in the Chaos Sea. Its power must be terrifying. Even if he was a God Emperor, his life would be in danger once he was swallowed by the bottomless abyss-like vortex. More importantly, he did not know where the huge vortex led to. After he was swallowed by the vortex, he did not know where he would be swept to. Perhaps he was still in the Chaos Sea but on the other side. It was also possible that it led to the outer realm and sent him to a cold and desolate unknown area. He would wander in the void for countless years before returning to the origin planet. The most likely possibility was that after he was swallowed by the vortex, the Chaos Sea would suck out his cultivation and divine power. His divine body and divine spark would be minced into pieces and he would die. Although Ji Tianxing knew the consequences of entering the bottomless abyss, he still chose to jump in without hesitation. He had indeed successfully escaped the pursuit of the Lord Hall Master. However, he was not at his wits' end. Instead, he made that choice at the critical moment because he was confident. He did not understand the Chaos Sea thoroughly enough and did not know what was hidden in the bottomless abyss. However, before he chose to enter the bottomless abyss, he was at a critical moment of life and death. He had a sudden impulse like back then and had an epiphany. It was as if a voice was guiding him and making him take the initiative to enter the vortex. There was clearly no sound in his mind, but some messy images flashed through his mind. Those messy images were basically related to the Chaos Sea and the Sea Beast race. Through the dozens of messy images, Ji Tianxing captured two important pieces of information. Firstly, the Chaos Sea was the source of the origin planet and the entire universe. It was the most mysterious and unfathomable, but it also contained great opportunities. Secondly, the sea beast race that lived in the Chaos Sea was the oldest intelligent life form in the world and also the guardian of the heavenly Dao door. When Ji Tianxing summarized these two important pieces of information from the messy images, he immediately understood that this was a revelation from the heavenly Dao. Although the second piece of information did not seem to have anything to do with him entering the vortex. However, he believed that the heavenly Dao would not remind him for no reason. At the very least, the first piece of information gave him more confidence that his life would not be in danger even if he crawled into the abyss-like vortex. It was precisely because of the sudden revelation from the heavenly Dao that Ji Tianxing made such a decisive decision. Schwa. When Ji Tianxing entered the bottomless abyss, all he could see was darkness. He could only feel his body descending rapidly. He was engulfed by the powerful devouring force, and his body fell uncontrollably into the deepest part of the abyss, as if he had fallen into boundless darkness. Thinking of the unknown danger he was about to face, he was powerless to break free from the devouring of the abyss. He could only use all his power to condense a shield to protect himself. Boom! A moment later he fell into boundless darkness. It was unknown what he crashed into, but there was a muffled sound. It was as if he had crashed into a turbulent torrent, or perhaps he had broken through a spatial barrier. The tremendous recoil caused Ji Tianxing's shield to flicker with a golden light and shatter on the spot. His head was also dizzy and his eyes were seeing stars. He couldn't see the things around him clearly. He didn't know how long he had drifted in the darkness. Suddenly, he saw a faint wisp of light in a distant area in front of him. He used the last of his strength, struggled to break free from the powerful devouring force, and flew towards that faint wisp of light. Crack! A moment later, another crisp shattering sound rang out. Ji Tianxing seemed to have broken through a spatial barrier and finally escaped the shackles of darkness. However, his injuries were too severe and his consciousness and strength were too exhausted. His consciousness was muddled and he gradually fell into a coma. The whistling wind and the surging torrent around him were getting farther and farther away until they disappeared. He had temporarily fainted and was unconscious. An unknown amount of time passed. Perhaps it was a day or perhaps a month. Ji Tianxing, who was in a coma, gradually regained consciousness and woke up. Before he could see the situation around him, his first reaction was pain. It was as if his entire body was pierced by needles and twisted by knives. It felt as if a ceramic bowl had been broken, then pasted and pieced back together. He even suspected that his divine body had been broken before, and his divine bones had been broken before. When he tried his best to open his eyes, he gradually saw the situation around him. The surroundings were endless darkness, completely filled with seawater. He could vaguely see some black shadows of rocks and mountain ranges. They were layered and rose and fell. He was lying in a low-lying valley. Around him were undulating black reefs and a few ancient stone tablets. Under him was a flat ground made of more than 10 black and brown stone slabs. Some twisted patterns could vaguely be seen on the stone slabs, forming strange patterns. Ji Tianxing understood that he had not been brought to the outer realm by the vortex. He was still in the Chaos Sea. However, he did not know where he had drifted to. He was actually lying in this valley at the bottom of the sea. He looked around and did not see any sea beasts. Ji Tianxing stretched his limbs and carefully observed the black and brown stone slabs under him. He could see that these black and brown stone slabs were not naturally formed. They had been polished and carved. Although the shape of the stone slabs was not very regular, they were relatively flat. After the edges were polished, they could barely be considered square. As for the twisted patterns on the stone slabs, they must have been carved. When a few stone slabs were pieced together, the patterns could form a pattern. It was also invisibly absorbing the power of the chaos sea, emitting a dim light. This should be the masterpiece of those sea beasts, right? Ji Tianxing muttered to himself as he sat down cross-legged and began to circulate his energy to check on his injuries. Before he fell into the bottomless abyss, he was already seriously injured. Now that his injuries had worsened and his strength was even weaker, his combat strength had decreased greatly. In my current state, if I meet the temple masters of the Xianxia temple again, I will have no chance to escape and will be killed by them. Fortunately, I don't know where I am. The temple masters of the Xianxia temple should not be able to find me. Ji Tianxing thought as he checked his injuries. There was silence all around. After he finished checking his injuries, he took out a few divine elixirs and swallowed them to temporarily suppress his injuries. He was planning to find a place to hide after figuring out the surrounding situation and enter the Jiutian Tenju Tower to heal his injuries. After his injuries were healed, he would pass through the Chaos Sea and return to land. However, at this moment, not far behind the black and brown mountain range, two huge black shadows swam over quietly. Ji Tianxing's first reaction was that there were sea beasts attacking. However, he found that the two huge sea beasts seemed to be hesitant and fearful. Moreover, he sensed that the two sea beasts only had the strength of an upper divine king, so he let down his guard. Chapter 46-44. Ji Tianxing pretended not to notice the approach of the two sea beasts. He continued to sit cross-legged on the stone slab and assumed a posture of channeling his energy. The two sea beasts moved forward hesitantly. Seeing that there was no reaction from him, they became bolder. One of the sea beasts looked like a dark purple electric eel. The other sea beast was a ferocious-looking bony fish with a dozen spikes all over its body. This was a bloodline passed down from ancient times. As the electric eel and bony fish approached Ji Tianxing, they did not forget to secretly communicate with each other. I clearly sensed that the foreign being had woken up. Why is he not moving? Can't you see that his injuries are very serious? Look at him sitting there motionless. He must be healing his injuries. So this is how the foreign being heals. But he is too careless. He didn't even look at where he is. How dare he heal his injuries here? So what if he is healing his injuries here? Do you dare to kill him and eat him? I don't dare. I still want to live for tens of thousands of years. It's strange. That foreign being has clearly fainted from his injuries. How can he still have such a powerful aura? Who knows? Anyway, he is a powerful being that we can't afford to offend. The further we stay away from him, the better. It's okay. We can't afford to offend him. The two lords will definitely have a way. We just need to keep an eye on him. When the two lords come, we will let them deal with him. After the electric eel and bony fish finished their discussion, they also timidly came to Ji Tianxing's side. The two of them did not dare to get too close to Ji Tianxing. They stopped 10,000 feet away from him and looked at him with shifty eyes. At this time, Ji Tianxing had already sensed the fluctuation of their divine sense and guessed what they were secretly discussing. Therefore, he released a beam of divine golden light at lightning speed and sealed off an area of 1,000 miles. Swoosh! An oval-shaped golden light shield instantly covered an area of 1,000 miles. Not only did it cover the bottom of the sea, but it also trapped the two sea beasts. The electric eel and bony fish suddenly panicked and trembled in fear. They hurriedly turned around and ran away. However, the golden light barrier released a huge amount of pressure, suppressing the two of them and preventing them from moving. Ji Tianxing also released his God Emperor's aura, which enveloped the two of them, causing them to go limp. They could only lean against the reefs and tremble. Spare me. Senior, please spare my life. Senior, please calm down. We didn't mean to offend you. Please don't kill us. The two sea beasts were so scared that they shivered and begged for mercy. Ji Tianxing saw that the two of them were really scared out of their wits and were not feigning civility, so he could see the clues. Therefore he temporarily put away his powerful aura and waved at the electric eel and bony fish. The electric eel and bony fish dared not hesitate, hurriedly crawling in front of him, lying on the reef team 1,000 feet away from him. Senior, what orders do you have? But please be frank. Senior, what can I do for you? Anything we can do? It is my duty to do so. Ji Tianxing frowned. He felt that the scene before him was a little comical. The other party was clearly a sea beast and not the same kind as him. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were enemies. Yet the other party was so respectful to him. He did not know if they were really frightened or if there was another reason. But these questions? Ji Tianxing's thoughts were useless even if he thought alone. He could only ask them. Tell me, where is this place? Who are you? The two sea beasts looked at each other. They did not dare to hide anything. They hurriedly replied, Senior, this is the territory of the Xianbing overlords and the Zidian overlords. Where are you currently? It's called the Black Rock region. We've been living here for tens of thousands of years. Overlords Xianbing overlords and Zidian overlords. Ji Tianxing frowned and thought to himself, in the Chaos Sea, it seems that only those ancient creatures at the God Emperor realm are called overlords. The overlords in the area closer to the land are the Blue Dragon and Yu Bingxin. The overlords in the area closer to the Evernight Sea region seem to be called Kun Sha and Scorpion Ancestor. Only the two ancient creatures in the middle of the sea region do not know their names. If I'm not wrong, the two ancient creatures that chased after the Azura God Emperor seem to be them. Thinking about it, Ji Tianxing had seen the Xianbing overlords and the Zidian overlords. The two sides had indirectly cooperated and worked together to kill the Azura God Emperor. Ji Tianxing pointed at the dark brown stone slabs under him and asked, What's with these stone slabs? The electric eel and bone fish looked at the stone slabs and hurriedly explained, Senior, that's an array formation that we figured out ourselves. It can gather the surrounding divine power to help us cultivate. Senior, when you appeared in the Black Rock region previously, you landed in a canyon thousands of kilometers away. We were the ones who found you and spent a lot of time and effort to move you here. We only thought that by letting you lie here you might wake up faster. While the two of them were answering, Ji Tianxing stared at them and sensed their spiritual fluctuations to determine if they were telling the truth. It turned out that the two of them were not lying. Ji Tianxing frowned again and asked in a deep voice, You are from the sea beast race and I am from a foreign race. According to what I know, the sea beast race has always rejected foreign races and hated the desolate race even more. When you found me, I was in a coma. You would have definitely killed me. How could you move me here to heal me? He still found it illogical. The two sea beasts' behavior was somewhat abnormal. Both the electric eel and the bony fish were stuck, unable to say anything. Seeing their strange expressions, Ji Tianxing's face turned gloomy. He released a wisp of pressure and enveloped them. Speak. Why are you doing this? What are your intentions? The electric eel and bone fish were shocked by Ji Tianxing's pressure and trembled in fear. Their eyes darted around as they anxiously considered how to answer. Ji Tianxing's analysis was right. Their behavior was indeed abnormal. But there were some things they did not dare to say. Seeing the two of them filled with fear but still unwilling to speak, Ji Tianxing threatened them again. Speak quickly. If you don't speak, I will kill you now. When the time comes, I will refine your soul memories and naturally know the answer. The electric eel and bone fish knew that this was a piece of cake for Ji Tianxing. The two of them trembled in fear and did not dare to hide anything. They answered truthfully, Senior, please calm down. Don't kill us. That's right. When we found you, you were seriously injured and unconscious. We did think of killing you, but there was a mysterious force protecting you that made it difficult for us to approach you. Furthermore, when we had the thought of killing you, there would always be a divine existence that would send down an invisible thought to warn us. If we dared to attack you, that divine existence would first turn us into ashes. Chapter 46-45. Divine Existence? Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a moment. He pointed above his head and asked in a deep voice, Are you talking about that? The electric eel and bony fish subconsciously looked up and then nodded in a hurry. Yes. Yes, it's exactly what you think. Ji Tianqing was now sure that the divine existence that the electric eel and bony fish were talking about was the heavenly axiom. He couldn't help but fall into deep thought. The heavenly axiom guided me and gave me inspiration and enlightenment when I was in a life-and-death situation. Now that I'm seriously injured and in a coma, the heavenly axiom sent down a mysterious force to protect me. These two sea beasts wanted to kill me but were warned by the heavenly axiom? No matter how you look at it, I'm more like the chosen one that the 4 great temples are looking for. Thinking of this, he thought of another question and asked the electric eel and bony fish, as the sea beasts, do you have any beliefs or believe in anything? For example, the ancestors of the sea beasts or the sea god. The electric eel and bony fish looked at each other and shook their heads, indicating that they didn't have such beliefs. Ji Tianqing didn't believe them and asked again, if you don't have any beliefs and haven't been enlightened, then you should have no taboos. Why are you afraid of the heavenly axiom? The electric eel and bony fish answered naturally, because the heavenly axiom is really supreme and terrifying. If we go against the will of the heavenly axiom, just a divine thunder will kill us. The two sea beasts answered honestly, and it was indeed the truth. However, Ji Tianqing wasn't satisfied with this answer. Ji Tianqing remembered that when the ancient creatures of the God-Emperor realm besieged the Xianxia temple, they said that the powerhouses of the Xianxia temple had entered the Chaos Sea several times in the past 30,000 years. Every time the people of the Xianxia temple entered the Chaos Sea, those ancient creatures would lead a large number of sea beasts out to intercept and kill the people of the Xianxia temple. Logically speaking, the people of the Xianxia temple were only exploring the Chaos Sea and studying the gate of the heavenly axiom in the Evernight Sea. They had never killed the sea beast. There was no need for the sea beasts to fight to the death with the people of the Xianxia divine palace. Therefore, Ji Tianqing felt that the sea beasts must have some kind of mission. Therefore, he tried to interrogate the two sea beasts in a roundabout way. He even resorted to coercion and bribery. The electric eel and the bony fish were scared half to death. They answered a series of questions in fear, but they did not say anything. In the end, they were forced by Ji Tianqing into a corner and had no choice but to use the Xianbing Overlord and the Zidian Overlord. Senior, we're just two insignificant minions in the Blackrock region. We don't know the secret you're talking about. Senior, Xianbing Lord and Zidian Lord will be here soon. Why don't you ask them? The two sea beasts were forced into a corner, and only then did they use the two lords as shields. However, when Ji Tianqing heard this, he immediately narrowed his eyes. A terrifying cold light shot out from his eyes. You've already informed Xianbing Lord and Zidian Lord? They'll be here soon. Obviously, when he was seriously injured and unconscious, the two sea beasts had already reported the news to the two lords. The two sea beasts suddenly became alert and realized that they had said something wrong. They were so frightened that their expressions changed drastically, and they trembled in fear. Senior, please spare our lives. It's our negligence, but we definitely mean no harm. Don't kill us. The two sea beasts trembled in fear and knelt on the ground, kowtowing and begging for mercy. In fact, from their conversation with Ji Tianqing, it was revealed that they had made two mistakes. Firstly, when they discovered Ji Tianqing, who was seriously injured and unconscious, they were filled with murderous intent and thought of killing him. Secondly, when they discovered that Ji Tianqing was protected by the power of the heavenly axiom, they reported the situation to Xianbing Lord and Zidian Lord. These two incidents revealed that they wanted to kill Ji Tianqing. Therefore, when Ji Tianqing killed the two of them, they only had themselves to blame. However, every living creature had the desire to live. Of course, the two sea beasts did not want to die, so they could only desperately beg for mercy. Even though they knew that the chances of Ji Tianqing forgiving them were very slim. Ji Tianqing had already raised his right hand and was ready to kill the electric eel and bony fish with one strike. Even though he was seriously injured, it was not difficult for him to do so. However, after he raised his hand, it froze for a moment before he retracted it. Scram, don't let me see you again. He shouted coldly with an expressionless face. He waved his hand and cast a divine seal to retract the golden light shield that sealed the two sea beasts. After the electric eel and bony fish regained their freedom, they did not dare to stay any longer. They hurriedly kowtowed to Ji Tianqing and thanked him a few times. Then they turned and fled as fast as they could. Although they did not know why Ji Tianqing suddenly changed his mind and was willing to let them live, they did not want to know why. However, they didn't want to pursue the answer. They were afraid that Ji Tianxing would change his mind and kill them with a wave of his hand. After the electric eel and bony fish escaped, Ji Tianxing did not stay any longer. The Xianbing Lord and Zidian Lord were about to arrive. Maybe in 2 hours or maybe in 10 breaths. If he was in his peak condition, he would not be afraid of the Xianbing Lord and Zidian Lord. No matter how powerful those two ancient creatures were, they could not be more terrifying than the Lord Hallmaster of the Shangqing Temple. However, it was a pity that Ji Tianxing was severely injured now and his strength had decreased greatly. If the Xianbing Lord and Zidian Lord surrounded him and both sides started a fierce battle, he would not have any chance of winning. Therefore it was better to leave first. It was best to escape. Swoosh. Ji Tianxing forced his severely injured body to turn into a stream of light and left the dark brown mountain range. He did not know how big the black lava region was or which region of the Chaos Sea it was located in. He only knew that he should fly south to stay away from the sea beasts and leave the Chaos Sea as soon as possible. However, it was a pity that his strength had decreased greatly, and his flying speed was also much slower. He had originally planned to use the Sword of Burial of Heaven to enter the Sword World and then use the Divine Sword to leave this region. However, at this moment he sensed two powerful auras approaching quickly. 80,000 miles, 60,000 miles, 40,000 miles. With Ji Tianxing's keen observation skills, he immediately understood that those were two ancient creatures of the God Emperor realm. If he was not mistaken, it should be the Xianbing Lord and Zidian Lord who had arrived. Damn it! They actually came so quickly. Ji Tianxing was secretly anxious, but his aura had already been locked onto by the two ancient creatures of the God Emperor realm. He did not dare to act rashly. If he sped up and fled now, he would definitely be pursued by the Xianbing Lord and Zidian Lord. Moreover, the Xianbing Lord and Zidian Lord were in their peak condition. They were like fish in water in the Chaos Sea and their speed was extremely fast. Even if he tried his best to escape, he would not be able to escape. Under such circumstances, Ji Tianxing decided not to escape. He put away the Sword of Burial of Heaven and stood there calmly. Chapter 46-46. Swoosh. Swoosh. Under Ji Tianxing's gaze, two beams of divine light flew towards him from afar. Just as he had sensed with his divine sense, the two ancient creatures were the God Emperor level sea beasts that he had seen before. The sea beast on the left was 3,000 feet long and looked like an octopus. Its entire body was icy blue and its body was as huge as a mountain. It had thousands of tentacles of different lengths. It was one of the two lords of this area, Xianbing. The sea beast on the right was more than 2,000 feet long. Its entire body was purple with a hint of red. It looked like a lobster and a crab and it had a pair of huge purple claws. The strange thing was that although it was a sea beast, it had 4 pairs of wide wings. The edges of the wings were covered with barbs. This sea beast with a hint of red was one of the two lords, Zidian. Xianbing and Zidian arrived at the scene. They stopped 100 miles away from Ji Tianxing and stared at him vigilantly. Who is that guy? Is he the severely injured and unconscious foreign race master that the locals mentioned? Judging from his aura, he should be an initial God Emperor. I don't know why, but I feel that his aura is a little familiar. Or have I seen it before? Xianbing and Zidian looked at Ji Tianxing and discussed telepathically. At this time, Ji Tianxing was in his original appearance. When he, Xianbing and Zidian were hunting down the Azure God Emperor, he was in the appearance of Su Juechen. Therefore, Xianbing and Zidian felt that his aura was familiar, but they could not recognize him. Strange, wasn't he seriously injured and unconscious? When did he wake up? Also, he sensed that we were coming, but he didn't run away in a panic. He even stood there calmly. Is he not worried that we would attack him? Isn't he too confident? Ji Tianxing appeared to be very calm and collected, which made Xianbing and Zidian unable to make up their minds. They did not dare to act rashly. The two of them locked onto Ji Tianxing's aura and observed it carefully while continuing to discuss via telepathy. This guy is from a race that we've never seen before. He actually has the strength of a God Emperor. How can he be a nobody? I guess he has nothing to do with the 4 great divine halls. Otherwise he would have been famous a long time ago. We should also know him. Strange. Why would an alien God Emperor come here? He's not even a member of the 4 great temples. It seems that only the people from the Xianxia temple have entered the Chaos Sea during this period of time. Even if this guy isn't from the Xianxia Divine Palace, it might have something to do with it. There's no point in us guessing here. Why don't I send a message to Blue Dragon, Yu Bingxin, Xianxia, and Scorpion Ancestor? Maybe they know. That makes sense. After the two sea beasts discussed their countermeasures, Xianbing took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to the other four God Emperor Realm sea beasts. At this moment, Ji Tianxing saw that Xianbing and Zidian had arrived. Why did they not speak? They did not intend to attack? He was about to turn around and leave. However, Xianbing and Zidian had been locking onto his aura. As long as he made a single move, would he immediately teleport far away? They blocked Ji Tianxing's path. Swoosh. Swoosh. Two divine lights flashed. Xianbing and Zidian surrounded Ji Tianxing one after another. Ji Tianxing frowned secretly. He guessed that the other party would not let the matter rest, but he was also mentally prepared. He asked in a deep voice, "What? With just the two of you, you want to stop this emperor's footsteps?" Xianbing and Zidian were not angry, nor did they show any killing intent. They sneered and said, "My friend from another race, don't forget that this is our territory. You came here without warning, so we should at least ask about it. Otherwise, you are too arrogant. Two of our subordinates found you here, seriously injured and unconscious. There's something fishy about this matter. Please explain your identity and background clearly before you leave." Xianbing and Zidian made it clear that they would not let Ji Tianxing leave. Whether Ji Tianxing exchanged words with them or fought with real weapons, Xianbing and Zidian would not give up. Ji Tianxing understood this, so he could only be patient and deal with Xianbing and Zidian. In order to stall for time, Zidian pretended to look around. After looking around, he asked, "My friend from another race, where are our two subordinates? Don't tell me you didn't see them. The place where you are unconscious is where they usually cultivate." Ji Tianxing did not have any grudges with the Sea Beast clan, so he did not want to become enemies. He answered honestly, "Before you came, I talked to them. However, I did not kill them. I let them go." Xianbing and Zidian originally thought that Ji Tianxing would kill them to cover his tracks. They did not expect that he would let the two Divine King Realm sea beasts go. Xianbing showed a skeptical look. He sneered and said, "You should know that such a cheap lie can be easily exposed. If you don't dare to admit what you have done, then it proves that there is something wrong with you." Before he could finish, Ji Tianxing said, "It's easy to prove. They haven't gone far. You should be able to call them back." Zidian took out a communication jade slip without hesitation and sent a message to the electric eel and bony fish. As expected. After a short while, Zidian received a reply from the electric eel and bony fish. The facts proved that Ji Tianxing was right. Therefore, Zidian ordered the electric eel and bony fish to return to where they were. He had some questions to ask them. While waiting, Xianbing asked Ji Tianxing indirectly about his identity and background. However, Ji Tianxing did not reveal anything. Not long after, Xianbing received a reply from the Blue Dragon and Xianxia. The Blue Dragon's reply was nothing special. However, Xianxia's reply made Xianbing and Zidian's eyes light up. Xianxia told them that they had met a desolate god emperor a few days ago. His name was Zhou Xian and he was from the Xianxia temple. However, Zhou Xian had killed the Xianxia temple's sixth hall master, so there was something wrong with his identity. Later, Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor stopped Zhou Xian and fought with him for a few hours. In the end, the three hall masters of the Xianxia temple passed by, and the first hall master personally attacked Zhou Xian. The two sides chased each other for 2 days. The first hall master was strong enough to destroy Zhou Xian's divine body. Only then did everyone realize that the so-called Zhou Xian was actually a fake. He was originally a black-haired, white-robed alien youth. He possessed Zhou Xian and used Zhou Xian's identity as a cover to sneak into the Xianxia temple. Finally, the first hall master chased the white-robed youth and arrived near a huge whirlpool. In order to escape, the white-robed youth, who had nowhere to go, could only jump into the bottomless abyss and disappear. Xianxia and Scorpion Ancestor had been lurking in the dark and watched the whole thing, so they knew very well. After the white-robed youth disappeared, they thought that the matter had come to an end, so they quietly left. The three hall masters of the Xianxia temple also left on the battleship. Black-haired, white-robed alien youth. Xian Bing put away the communication jade slip and stared at Ji Tianqing with a playful smile in his eyes. Chapter 46-47. Without a doubt, Ji Tianqing's identity had been exposed. The Lord Hallmaster of the Xianxia Temple had exposed his disguise and forced him to reveal his true identity. Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor were very wretched. They hid at the side and watched the whole process. Xian Bing and Zidian were neighbors with Xianxia and the Scorpion Ancestor. They were friends and kept in contact with each other. All they needed to do was to send a message and everything would be clear. After Xian Bing put away the communication jade slip, he looked at Ji Tianqing with a playful smile and said, "As the saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Moreover, you have no grudges with the Sea Beast clan. Moreover, we have fought side by side before. Therefore, we should be able to talk openly and honestly." Ji Tianqing frowned and said expressionlessly, "We have no grudges or connections. Therefore, there is nothing to talk about." Zidian grinned and said in a cold tone, "Although you have disguised yourself well, you were seriously injured and unconscious not long ago. I don't think you have recovered so quickly. We are very sincere and would like to know some things from you. We hope you can cooperate." Although Zidian did not say anything threatening, the Sea Beast clan was not kind. However, the Sea Beast clan had never been kind creatures. The threat in its words was obvious. Ji Tianqing was seriously injured and his combat strength had decreased greatly. However, he still had a trump card. Even if he really fought with Xian Bing and Zidian, he was confident that he could escape from this place. However, since Xian Bing and Zidian did not take the initiative to attack, he did not need to let things develop to that stage. After pondering for a moment, Ji Tianqing asked in a deep voice, "What do you want to ask?" Xian Bing and Zidian looked at each other. Seeing that he was willing to cooperate, they were obviously happy and expectant. Therefore Xian Bing said first, "You may know that the Sea Beast clan was born in the Chaos Sea and grew up here. Heaven has given us more power, but it also restricts us. We can hardly leave the Chaos Sea. Otherwise, our power will decline and our lifespan will decrease rapidly. Therefore, we are curious about the affairs of the outside world. Even if we have some understanding of the desolate race and the 4 great temples on the continent, it is only through the people from those temples." Although Xian Bing and Zidian wanted to ask Ji Tianqing some questions, the first thing they did was to introduce themselves. This was also a sign of sincerity. It showed that it really wanted to communicate with Ji Tianqing and did not have any ulterior motives. After Ji Tianqing heard this, he thought to himself, "So, it is not a legend that the sea beasts cannot leave the Chaos Sea. It is true. No wonder the sea beast race's strength had increased greatly in the Chaos Sea and was blessed by nature. Could it be that the Heavenly Tao was looking out for the Sea Beast clan? At the same time, the Heavenly Tao gave them restrictions or even missions." Thinking of this, he asked, "Previously I asked 2 of your people, but they didn't know much. Since you are lords and ancient creatures that have lived for tens of thousands of years, I have a question that I would like to ask. Do you believe in or obey the Heavenly Tao? The Heavenly Tao has given you greater power, but it has also given you corresponding restrictions. Are there any missions? For example, guarding the Eternal Night Sea region?" When this question was raised, Xian Bing and Zidian immediately became alert. Their eyes became much sharper. The 2 of them stared at Ji Tianqing at the same time, revealing a guarded look. "Why are you asking these questions? Isn't this nonsense? Your Excellency, don't forget that we are the ones asking you questions, not the other way around." Ji Tianqing's expression was calm as he said, "Since you want to communicate with this emperor, then we should answer each other's questions. If you are the only ones allowed to ask questions and I am not allowed to, then I will refuse to communicate with you." On the surface he was arguing with Xian Bing and Zidian, but in fact he was secretly laughing. He had already seen through some clues. Xian Bing and Zidian had such a big reaction and showed such vigilance. It was enough to show that his guess was probably right. Perhaps in order to change the topic as soon as possible, Xian Bing asked in a deep voice, "Tell me, where are you from? What grudge do you have with the Xianxia Temple? Why did you take over the body of a citizen of the Xianxia Temple, sneak into the Xianxia Temple team, and take the opportunity to assassinate the 6th Hall Master of the Xianxia Temple?" Ji Tianqing answered naturally, "My surname is long and my name is Tian. I come from an unknown place on the other side of the continent. I have nothing to do with the Xianxia Temple, nor do I have any grudges with them. The reason why I sneaked into the Xianxia temple team and assassinated the 6th Hall Master was because I had a personal grudge with the 6th Hall Master. After answering, he sneered and asked, "Why are you so interested in the affairs of the Xianxia temple? Could it be that the grudge between you and the Xianxia temple is fake?" "Of course not." Zidian immediately retorted and said with some agitation, "Those bastards of the Xianxia temple would break into the Chaos Sea every few days and try to explore the Evernight Sea. Over the years we have fought countless times and many of our people have died in the sea. We are sworn enemies with the Xianxia temple." Zidian took the initiative to mention the Evernight Sea. Even if it realized that something was wrong and changed the topic in time, Tianxing still took the opportunity to ask, "The Xianxia temple entered the Chaos Sea just to explore the Evernight Sea and passed by your territory. They didn't kill your people. Why do you have to intercept them and fight them to the death?" This Purple Lightning was suddenly at a loss for words. His gaze was somewhat evasive, unwilling to look at Tianxing. Xianbing was also a little angry and glared at Zidian as if blaming it for spilling the beans again. It could be seen that the sea beasts were uneducated. Even if they were ancient creatures that had lived for tens of thousands of years, they were not very scheming and shrewd. Seeing that Xianbing and Zidian were silent, Tianxing smiled and continued to ask, "You wouldn't pay such a big price to stop the Xianxia temple from exploring the Evernight Sea for no reason. So, there is only one explanation, and that is, you have been given some kind of mission or some kind of mission. And the only one who can give you missions and missions is probably the supreme heavenly way that created everything." Xianbing and Zidian suddenly opened their eyes wide and stared at Tianxing with shock and vigilance. Although they didn't speak, the meaning in their eyes was clearly, "How did you know this secret?" The smile on Tianxing's face grew wider and he continued, "You can deny it or you can refuse to answer. However, the 2 people under your command should be back soon. Later you can ask them about the specific situation first, and then decide whether to answer or not." "What do you mean?" Xianbing and Zidian were a little confused and didn't know what he meant. At this time the electric eel and the bonefish appeared in the sea not far away and swam over hesitantly. Xianbing and Zidian glanced at Tianxing and then ordered the electric eel and the bonefish to come closer and ask them about the specific situation and what had happened before. Tianxing looked at them calmly as they talked to each other and secretly circulated his energy to heal his injuries. Chapter 46-48. The electric eel and the bony fish were very afraid of Tianxing. However, with the presence of Xianbing and Zidian, the 2 of them felt much more at ease. As for Xianbing and Zidian's questions, the 2 of them answered them without hesitation. They explained the cause and process of the incident clearly. Previously, when Tianxing interrogated them, no matter how scared they were, they still held back when answering questions. However, when faced with Xianbing and Zidian, they did not hide anything and answered all of their questions. Xianbing and Zidian listened attentively and asked a few questions from time to time. They kept nodding and shaking their heads. Tianxing did not interrupt them, nor did he interrupt them. He quietly treated his injuries. After a quarter of an hour, Xianbing and Zidian finished their questioning and let the electric eel and the bony fish leave. The 2 sea beasts hesitated for a moment. They seemed to be worried that Xianbing and Zidian would have a conflict with Tianxing and that they would be punished by the heavenly Tao. However, the 2 of them had already told Xianbing and Zidian about this matter. They did not want to say anything more and could only turn around and leave. After the electric eel and the bony fish left, only Xianbing, Zidian, and Tianxing were left in the dark underwater valley. The atmosphere became a little strange. Tianxing looked at the 2 of them quietly. There was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth. It was hard to tell what he was thinking. Xianbing and Zidian's attitudes also changed. When they looked at Tianxing again, they were not as confident and arrogant as before. Seeing that the 2 of them were unwilling to speak, Tianxing took the initiative to say, "You know the cause and the details of the incident. Now can you answer this emperor's question?" Of course, Xianbing and Zidian would not answer his question directly. Instead, they looked at him with a complicated gaze and asked, "What is your background? Why does the heavenly Tao want to protect you?" "The first race that the heavenly Tao favored and created was us, the sea beast race. You're just an outsider. How could you possibly be so favored by the heavenly Tao?" The gate of heavenly Tao was the origin of all things. The sea beasts in the Chaos Sea were the earliest living beings to appear. This was the consensus of all living beings on the planet of origin. The sea beast had always thought that they were the favored children of the heavenly Tao and were favored by the heavenly Tao. Even if they were trapped in the Chaos Sea, restrained, and even shouldered a sacred mission, it was still the glory of the sea beast race. But now this notion seemed to be overturned. Xian Bing and Zidian's feelings were very complicated. They couldn't accept this result in a short time, so they couldn't wait to know Ji Tianqing's real identity. Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "You probably know one thing. For the past tens of thousands of years, the 4 great shrines have been looking for the so-called Heaven's Chosen One. Unfortunately, they couldn't find him no matter how hard they searched. And this emperor should be the one they are looking for." "What? That's impossible." Xian Bing and Zidian were stunned. They widened their eyes in shock and looked at Ji Tianqing in disbelief. Of course, they knew that in the past 30,000 years, the 4 great shrines would often enter the Chaos Sea to explore the Evernight Sea region. They also knew that the 4 great shrines had been looking for the Heaven's Chosen One, hoping that the Heaven's Chosen One could help them solve some secret. But they didn't know what the so-called Heaven's Chosen One meant or what the conditions were. They could only understand it literally. It probably meant that the person chosen by the heavenly Tao had some special relationship with the heavenly Tao. So far it seemed that Ji Tianqing was protected by the heavenly Tao. The 2 sea beasts wanted to kill him, but they were warned by the heavenly Tao. Although it was just an illusory thought, and no one had evidence to prove that it was the will of the heavenly Tao. Moreover, no one knew what the heavenly Tao was and no one had ever seen it. But the sea beasts were the first creatures created by the heavenly Tao, and they were also one of the heavenly Tao's favorites. Of course they had the right to speak. Xian Bing and Zidian asked about the situation, and they didn't doubt the electric eel and bonefish's words. The scene fell silent again. Xian Bing and Zidian looked at Ji Tianqing in a daze, not knowing what to say. Ji Tianqing didn't rush them. He knew that they were shocked and needed some time to digest this shocking news. After a long while, when Xian Bing and Zidian came back to their senses, he said, "This emperor has already revealed his identity and origin, and has shown his sincerity. If you still don't tell me, then there's no need for us to continue talking." Since he was protected by the heavenly Tao and the sea beasts believed and feared the heavenly Tao, he didn't have to worry about anything. If they could talk, then they could talk. If they couldn't, then he could leave calmly. He believed that the sea beasts wouldn't dare to stop him. But Xian Bing didn't give up. He said, "Even if you might be the one chosen by the 4 great temples, how can you prove it?" Ji Tianqing looked at him and said with a smile, "Your 2 subjects have already verified it. If you don't believe me, you can try." In fact, he wasn't sure if the heavenly Tao would warn Xian Bing and Zidian after they tried to kill him. But he was extremely confident and sure. Xian Bing and Zidian were hesitant and didn't dare to try. The electric eel and bonefish were small fries. After they tried, they received a warning from the heavenly Tao. They were God Emperor powerhouses and they dreamed of immortality. If they were warned by the heavenly Tao, it wouldn't be good. If the heavenly Tao remembered this, wouldn't they have no hope of immortality in this lifetime? Zidian looked very conflicted. After hesitating for a while, he said, "But you still haven't told us where you came from." Ji Tianqing frowned and said, "I've already said that I came from an unknown place on the other side of the continent. Even if I tell you in detail where I cultivate and which mountain I built my cave abode on, how can you tell if it's true or not? You haven't even left the Chaos Sea, so you haven't seen land." Purple Lightning was momentarily at a loss for words. Ji Tianqing was a little impatient. His face gradually turned cold. He said in a low voice, "I'll give you one last chance. Are you going to tell us or not? If you don't want to answer, then we don't have to waste our breath." Seeing that he was angry and could leave at any time, Xian Bing and Zidian could only dispel their worries and quickly answer. "Fine, I admit it." Xian Bing sighed dejectedly and said, "You guessed right. We sea beasts do believe in the heavenly Tao because we're the first creatures created by the heavenly Tao. We're also the most blessed race." Zidian continued to explain, "Although the heavenly Tao gave us special talents and greater power, it also gave us more restrictions. Just as you said, the heavenly Tao has indeed given us the mission to protect the Chaos Sea and the Evernight Sea region." Xian Bing and Zidian finally admitted it. This proved that Ji Tianxing's guess was correct. At the same time, it also explained why the sea beasts would stop the people from the 4 sacred halls from entering the Chaos Sea at all costs. But once the sacred hall experts entered the Evernight Sea region, the sea beasts disappeared without a trace. Chapter 46-49. Why don't the sea beasts dare to enter the Evernight Sea region? Is this also the will of the heavenly Tao? Ji Tianxing was very curious about this question. He felt that this question was also very important, so he asked directly. The sea beasts were not as cunning as the desolate race. In comparison, they were easier to get along with. It was easier to solve the problem by directly asking. Xian Bing and Zidian had already confessed their identity, mission. Naturally, they would not refuse to answer this question. Yes, the Evernight Sea region is a forbidden area. No living beings can go near it. There are the most dangerous traps and forces there. Some reckless people once entered the sea region, but they were turned into ashes before they could go far. Zidian nodded and explained to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and thought to himself, the Evernight Sea region is too dangerous. This is only part of the reason. The most important reason is the restriction of the will of the heavenly Tao. The center of the Evernight Sea region is where the door of the heavenly Tao is. The will of the heavenly Tao restricts the sea beasts like this to protect itself. It prevents the living beings of the world from prying into the mystery of the heavenly Tao. All his previous doubts were now answered. Ji Tianxing had more guesses and deductions. After pondering for a moment, he saw that Xian Bing and Zidian were silent. He tried to ask, since you bear the mission given by the heavenly Tao, you can be considered the guardians of the heavenly Tao. And I am the chosen one. Perhaps only I can solve the mystery of eternal life. Shouldn't you assist me in exploring the Evernight Sea region? Ji Tianxing only mentioned the Evernight Sea region and did not mention the door of the heavenly Tao. This was because he knew that the sea beasts did not dare to enter the Evernight Sea region. They might not know about the door of the heavenly Tao. But his question made Xian Bing and Zidian's expressions change greatly. They quickly shook their heads. No. Absolutely not. We can be called the guardians of the heavenly Tao. But you, the chosen one, have yet to be verified. Moreover, our mission is to protect the Chaos Sea and the Evernight Sea region from prying eyes. Even you can't barge into the Evernight Sea, otherwise we'll... Fortunately, Xian Bing and Zidian did not transform into their human forms. Otherwise they would definitely shake their heads and wave their hands. However, Zidian stopped halfway through her sentence. Ji Tianxing looked at it with a playful smile and teased, "Why don't you continue? Otherwise what would happen? Are you going to attack me?" Zidian was very conflicted. She secretly sent a voice transmission to Xian Bing saying, "This is not right. Our mission is to guard the Evernight Sea region and not allow any creatures to spy on us." However, he was the chosen one and was protected by the heavenly Tao. If he were to charge into the Evernight Sea region and we were to stop him, wouldn't we be warned by the heavenly Tao? Wasn't this contradictory? What should we do? Xian Bing naturally couldn't answer such a contradictory question. He could only reply via voice transmission, "It's just a hypothesis." He didn't really barge into the Evernight Sea region. When he enters the Evernight Sea region, we'll see what happens then. That's the only way. Thus, Xian Bing and Zidian stopped worrying about this problem. The two of them looked at Ji Tianxing seriously and said in a serious tone, "Long Tian, we can't answer this question for the time being, but we definitely won't agree to it. The only thing we can do is to allow you to move about in the Chaos Sea. This is already the biggest concession we can make. In your current state, we advise you not to think about charging into the Evernight Sea region. In addition, we will inform Blue Dragon, Yu Bingxin, Kunsha, and the Scorpion Ancestor about your situation and let them know about it. We advise you to leave the Chaos Sea as soon as possible and not stay here." Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "I'm currently seriously injured and can't travel. As the chosen one, it's fine if you don't take care of me, but you're actually chasing me away. Haha, it seems like you have limited respect for the heavenly Tao and don't remember the mission given by the heavenly Tao. You're talking nonsense. How can you spout such nonsense?" Zidian and Xian Bing were shocked and angry and hurriedly stopped him. Their respect for the heavenly Tao came from the depths of their souls and was innate. It was as if the heavenly Tao had written their worship and respect for the heavenly Tao into their blood when it created the Sea Beast clan and passed it down from generation to generation. Therefore, Ji Tianxing's words caused them to be extremely alarmed. In addition to their panic, Xian Bing and Zidian's attitude also changed. They only wanted to leave this place as soon as possible and didn't want to see Ji Tianxing again. They had a premonition that if they continued to tangle with Ji Tianxing, they might fall into his trap and become his accomplices or subordinates. Since you haven't recovered from your injuries, you can recuperate wherever you want. It's fine as long as you don't enter the Evernight Sea region. We will order the people of the Black Rock region not to disturb you. You must leave as soon as possible after your injuries have healed. After saying these two sentences, Xian Bing and Zidian turned around and left. They didn't want to stay for a moment longer. Looking at their figures leaving in a hurry, Ji Tianxing's lips curled into a playful smile. During this trip to the Chaos Sea, he was hunted down by the Lord Hallmaster and lost the cover of Su Juechen's identity. His original body was also severely injured. However, he killed the Azura God Emperor and took revenge. He also saw the Evernight Sea region and the Gate of Heavenly Tao. More importantly, he had a deeper understanding of the Chaos Sea, the Sea Beast clan and the Heavenly Tao. Although he couldn't subdue Xian Bing and Zidian, he couldn't make the Sea Beast clan work for him either. However, he had interacted with the Sea Beast clan. When he came to the Chaos Sea in the future, he would be able to travel freely. When he succeeded in his revenge in the future, he would be more confident when he came to explore the Gate of Heavenly Tao. After a long time, Ji Tianxing confirmed that Xian Bing and Zidian had left. Only then did he return to the top of the underwater mountain range. He released his divine sense to explore the surrounding terrain, looking for a place where the divine power of heaven and earth was denser. In less than 15 minutes, he found a place where the divine power was denser. It was in a pitch-black trench that was hundreds of thousands of feet deep. Thus, he dived into the black trench and entered the dark brown rock wall. He cast a simple spell and set up a defensive array. Then he took out the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and entered the distorted spacetime to heal his injuries. When he started to heal in the distorted spacetime, everything in the outside world returned to normal. The dark brown rock wall returned to normal. There was nothing strange about it. The small Emperor-level array formation with a radius of 100 feet also covered all traces and auras. Apart from the God Emperor, no one could discover the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda. Not long after, the hundreds of thousands of sea beasts in the Black Rock region received strict orders from their overlord. All the sea beasts had to retreat to the edge of the Black Rock region and leave the central area empty. They were not allowed to approach. The sea beasts didn't understand the reason and were full of doubts. However, they still obeyed the order and migrated to the edge of the region. Only the electric eel and bone fish vaguely guessed the reason. However, they had to keep their mouths shut and didn't dare to leak the news. Chapter 4650. Time passed day after day. The Chaos Sea gradually calmed down, and the storm caused by the Shangqing Temple's intrusion gradually subsided. The 6 God Emperor realm ancient creatures of the 3 seas also returned to their lairs. The elite sea beasts under their command also returned to their bases and returned to their peaceful lives. If nothing unexpected happened, the Chaos Sea would be peaceful for many years to come. Until many years later, when the experts of the 4 temples intruded into the Chaos Sea again, the God Emperor realm lords would gather their armies again to stop and kill them. In comparison, the wars and killings on the planet of origin were indeed much less. At least there had never been a large-scale war between the 4 temples on land. There had never been a war between the overlords of the Chaos Sea. Furthermore, they maintained a good relationship. Overall, the planet of origin was relatively peaceful and peaceful. Ji Tianxing stayed in the distorted spacetime of the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda, healing his injuries in seclusion. His injuries were very serious. No matter how strong his recovery ability was, no matter how many elixirs he took, it would still take hundreds of years to fully recover. When his injuries were completely healed and he ended his seclusion, a full 100 years had passed in the distorted spacetime, and 2 years had passed in the outside world. In these 2 years, the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda was hidden in the rock walls of the dark trench, and it was not discovered by any creatures. The 600,000 sea beasts in the entire Black Rock region also obediently guarded the edge of the Black Rock region, not daring to approach the central region. Originally, after Ji Tianqing's injuries were healed, he should have left the Black Rock region, crossed half of the Chaos Sea and returned to land. But he did not leave the distorted space-time, and continued to cultivate in seclusion to condense the third Taoist rhyme. Before killing the Azura God Emperor, his third Taoist rhyme was already more than half completed. After killing the Azura God Emperor, he refined the Azura God Emperor's divinity fragment, and obtained a huge amount of divine power and many divine Dao laws. Now he was in seclusion to heal his injuries for another 100 years. After his injuries were healed, his strength and foundation had improved further. Of course, he had to take this opportunity to condense the third Taoist rhyme and greatly improve his strength. Time passed quietly. Ji Tianqing was immersed in his cultivation. He had no distractions and his strength continued to grow. A month in the outside world meant that he had been cultivating in the distorted spacetime for 50 months, which was more than 4 years. Finally, his third Taoist rhyme was successfully condensed. The 5-colored Taoist rhyme circled around his body for 3 days before it disappeared into his body. However, he still did not end his secluded cultivation. He was still absorbing the divine power of heaven and earth, consuming a huge amount of divine stones and cultivation resources to continue improving his strength. The blood flame sacred tree beside him had also grown to 90,000 feet tall and was burning with blood-red flames. Over the years, the blood flame sacred tree had continued to grow. In particular, during the battle between Shangqing Divine Palace and the Sea Beast tribe, a large number of king gods had died in battle. As a god-king level blood flame sacred tree, it continued to devour the blood, qi and soul essence left behind by the god kings. Its strength increased rapidly. Now the blood flame sacred tree had also reached the pinnacle of the god king level and was growing towards the god emperor level. After all, Ji Tianqing had killed the Azura God Emperor. The blood flame sacred tree had absorbed the blood, qi and soul essence of the God Emperor and obtained great benefits. It was because of the fall of the Azura God Emperor that the blood flame sacred tree had the opportunity to break through to the God Emperor level. However, Ji Tianqing had observed the blood flame sacred tree and could confirm that it was unable to break through for the time being. Unless he killed 1 or 2 more God Emperor powerhouses and allowed the blood flame sacred tree to devour more blood, qi and soul essence, then it would be able to break through to the God Emperor level. Unknowingly, another 100 years had passed in the distorted spacetime. The blood flame sacred tree was still burning with blood-red flames. Its strength continued to expand, but it was still unable to break through to the God Emperor level. Everyone who had been cultivating in seclusion under the sacred tree had more or less benefited from it. Among them, the Prajna God Emperor had benefited the least. She was already a God Emperor powerhouse. Before the blood flame sacred tree broke through to the God Emperor level, she could only absorb some divine power and would not receive much help. However, Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang, Qian Yu, Black Dragon, Zhen Hong, Lin Shui, Chao Qingyu and Yank had benefited the most. For so many years, everyone had been cultivating in seclusion under the blood flame sacred tree. They had endless cultivation resources and could continuously absorb the power of the blood flame sacred tree. Their strength had increased steadily. Now only a few people were still stuck at the mid-level God King level. Most of them had become high-level God Kings. As for Yun Yao and Ji Ku, they had been stuck at the pinnacle of the God King level for many years, unable to break through. Helpless, they could only imitate Ji Tianqing's actions. That was to continue cultivating in seclusion and continuously strengthen themselves. They had already strengthened themselves to more than 20 times the strength of ordinary pinnacle God Kings. Unfortunately, they could not obtain a fortuitous opportunity like Ji Tianqing's and were unable to break through to the God Emperor level. Many years ago, Ji Tianqing had also thought of a way to impart the heaven-punishing divine art that he had created to Yun Yao and Ji Ku. After he reached the God Emperor level, he had a new understanding of the heaven-punishing divine art and created an even more profound 7th-level cultivation technique. However, after Yun Yao and Ji Ku cultivated the heaven-punishing divine art, they could only break through the limits of a pinnacle God King and continuously strengthen themselves. They still could not break through to the God Emperor level. Perhaps they had to strengthen themselves to 99 times the strength of a pinnacle God King before they could naturally become a God Emperor. Time flew by. Under the quiet chaos sea, new sea beasts were born every day. Countless sea beasts also increased their strength and reached a higher realm. Another 3 years passed. The hundreds of thousands of sea beasts in the Black Rock region had been waiting at the border for 5 years. In these 5 years, many sea beasts had left their nests and cultivation grounds. The speed at which their strength increased had obviously decreased. In the first few years, the hundreds of thousands of sea beasts could still remember the orders of the two overlords and did not dare to approach the central region of the Black Rock region. However, in the 5th year many sea beasts became anxious and impatient. They began to discuss why the two overlords had asked them to leave their nests and not approach the central region. The sea beasts could not come to a conclusion and wanted to return to their nests and cultivation grounds. Thus, after repeated discussions, they decided to send a message to the two overlords, Xianbing and Zidian, requesting to return to their nests. Xianbing and Zidian received many requests from their citizens and were also hesitant. They did not know if Ji Tianxing was still in the Black Rock region or how much his injuries had healed. According to their estimates, Ji Tianxing would need at least 100 years to recover from his injuries. However, the sea beasts of the Black Rock region were already impatient after waiting for 5 years. How could they wait for another 100 years? After thinking about it, Xianbing and Zidian could only agree to the request of the sea beasts and allow them to return to their nests and cultivation grounds. In their opinion, Ji Tianxing might have already left the Black Rock region. Even if he did not leave with his God Emperor level strength, it was unlikely that he would be disturbed by the sea beasts. Chapter 46-51. In fact, Xianbing and Zidian's thoughts made sense. Even when hundreds of thousands of sea beasts returned to their homes and territories, they did not disturb Ji Tianxing. Almost all of the sea beasts were kept in the dark. They did not know that there was a foreign god emperor hiding in the middle of the Black Rock region. Only the electric eel and bony fish knew the inside story and they were very nervous. After returning to the middle of the Black Rock region, the two of them rushed back to the underwater mountain range and secretly investigated the nest and the cultivation ground that was pieced together with a few stone slabs. They were trembling with fear. They were extremely cautious and fearful, afraid that Ji Tianxing was still recovering there. Once they were discovered by Ji Tianxing, they would be frightened and intimidated like last time. However, when the two of them approached carefully, they found that the underwater mountain range was empty. There was also no one on the simple array laid out by a few stone slabs. Where is that foreign god emperor? Did he leave long ago? Who knows? We'd better be careful. The electric eel and bony fish looked around and discussed telepathically. They were obviously relieved and there was a hint of relief in their tone. Then the two of them searched the surrounding area within 100,000 miles. They even checked the trench and did not find any trace of Ji Tianxing. Then the electric eel and bony fish were really relieved. They returned to the underwater mountain range and began to cultivate. They thought that Ji Tianxing had left and that the terrifying nightmare was finally over. Their lives finally returned to normal. However, 20 years later an unforeseen event occurred. Ji Tianxing had been cultivating in seclusion under the blood flame sacred tree in the distorted spacetime. After condensing the third Taoist rhyme, his strength was still increasing. He gradually reached the peak of the God Emperor initial stage. He began to integrate the hundreds of new laws and tried to condense the fourth Taoist rhyme. During the long years of cultivation, not only did he cultivate the heaven-punishing divine art and derive more advanced cultivation techniques, but he also integrated the third Taoist rhyme to strengthen his own divine powers. As his strength increased, so did his overall combat prowess. He was getting closer and closer to the middle level of God Emperor. In the process of cultivation he discovered a problem. They were both cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime. However, there were still some differences between cultivating on the continent of the Star of Origin and cultivating in the Chaos Sea. On the surface, the continent of the Star of Origin was richer in cultivation resources, and the divine power of heaven and earth was abundant. However, in reality the Chaos Sea was the origin of all things. It was the place with the densest divine power and the richest cultivation resources. If he cultivated in seclusion in the Chaos Sea, he could absorb more divine power. The speed at which his strength increased was faster than on land. However, this was only a very small problem. However, after Ji Tianxing discovered this problem, he continued to ponder and ponder, gradually coming up with an answer. The reason why the land and the Chaos Sea had two different effects was because of the distance between them and the Heavenly Tao door. Since the Heavenly Tao created everything in the world, including everything in the universe, then the source of all power was the Heavenly Tao. The Heavenly Tao door was located in the depths of the Chaos Sea. If he stayed in the Chaos Sea, he could naturally absorb more divine power and sense more Heavenly Tao power and aura. Because of this, Zhi Tianqing decided to cultivate in seclusion in the Chaos Sea for a long time. He wanted to absorb more Heavenly Tao power and condense the Tao runes as soon as possible. Similarly, Yunyao, Jiku, and the others had the same feeling when they were cultivating in seclusion. They could absorb more divine power and sense the power of the Heavenly Tao more clearly. Their strength increased faster. 20 years had passed in the outside world. Meanwhile, Zhi Tianqing and everyone around him had cultivated in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for 1,000 years. This should be the longest time Zhi Tianqing had cultivated in seclusion. Of course, the results of this seclusion were also remarkable and delightful. Not only had he condensed the fourth Tao rune and successfully reached the middle level of the God Emperor, but he had also deduced the 8th level of the heaven-punishing divine art. The various mystical abilities and ultimate skills that he had mastered in the past had also been strengthened and perfected. They now possessed more power and more effects. Apart from that, he also took a lot of time to help Yunyao and Jiku. He hoped that they could break through to the God Emperor stage as soon as possible. In the beginning, no matter how much he planned and personally helped, he could only help Yunyao and Jiku strengthen their strength. He could not break through. Thus, he could only calm down and think about how to solve this problem. He knew that it was very difficult to break through to the godly monarch stage. It required extremely high talent. Breaking through to the God Emperor stage was 100 times or 1,000 times more difficult. 99% of godly monarchs would never be able to break through to the God Emperor stage in their lifetime. Not only did it require aptitude and talent, but it also required fortuitous opportunities related to the Heavenly Tao. The heaven-punishing divine art that Zhi Tianqing had created was one of the fortuitous opportunities related to the Heavenly Tao. However, when he broke through to the God Emperor stage, he did not rely on the heaven-punishing divine art. Instead, he returned the 5 elements world to its original position and allowed the 3 great eternal worlds to coexist. This filled the gap in the Heavenly Tao. Therefore, Yunyao and Jiku could only cultivate the heaven-punishing divine art. They could not break through quickly. Zhi Tianqing thought of the first half of one of the 2 supreme treasures, the Eternal Heavenly Book. More than 1,000 years ago, the 5 great godly monarchs had fought with him for these 2 supreme treasures. He had obtained the heaven-punishing formation while the 5 great godly monarchs had obtained the Eternal Heavenly Book. After that, the 5 great godly monarchs comprehended the Eternal Heavenly Book and broke through to the God Emperor stage one after another. This proved that the Eternal Heavenly Book could lead one to the God Emperor stage. He felt that Yunyao and Jiku's aptitude was not much worse than the 5 great godly monarchs. Since the 5 great godly monarchs could reach the God Emperor stage, Yunyao and Jiku could do it too. Therefore, he began to search the Azura God Emperor's divine soul memories. Previously, when he refined the Azura God Emperor's Godhead fragment, not only did he absorb the divine Tao laws and divine power, but he also refined the Azura God Emperor's memories. In the Azura God Emperor's memories, there was a part of the Eternal Heavenly Book's contents. After Zhi Tianqing carefully comprehended and sensed it, he felt that part of the contents was not comprehensive enough. That was only a part of the Eternal Heavenly Book's contents. It was definitely not the whole thing. Therefore, he went to consult Pan Ruo God Emperor. Ever since Pan Ruo God Emperor entered the distorted spacetime, she had been cultivating in seclusion under the blood flame sacred tree without stopping. After cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for more than 1,200 years, not only did she recover from her injuries and return to her peak, but she also condensed her 4th Taoist rhyme and reached the middle stage of the God Emperor stage. Thinking back, after the 5 great godly monarchs surrounded and killed Kenshin, Pan Ruo broke through to the God Emperor stage in less than 100 years. Now, 1,000 years had passed in the world and she had reached the middle stage of the God Emperor stage. Such a breakthrough speed was already world-shocking. However, compared to Zhi Tianqing, this was nothing. Zhi Tianqing cultivated from a mortal to the middle stage of the God Emperor stage in just over 200 years. No matter which plane or heaven he was in, he was the one and only person in history. Chapter 4652. Ji Tianxing asked the Prajna God Emperor about the Eternal Heavenly Book. At that time the two of them had just broken through to the middle level of the God Emperor. After meeting, the Prajna God Emperor looked at Ji Tianxing with a complicated expression. There was shock, envy and some admiration. She was even more convinced that Ji Tianxing was the chosen one that the various temples were looking for. Only those who were chosen by the heavens would have such monstrous aptitudes and such an unparalleled speed of advancement. Ji Tianxing didn't chat with her and went straight to the point to explain his intentions. Previously, I killed the Azura God Emperor in the depths of the Chaos Sea and refined his godhead. I also obtained a portion of his soul memories. However, the Eternal Heavenly Book in his memories is not complete. What's going on? Hearing his question, the Prajna God Emperor raised her eyebrows slightly. She thought for a moment and said indifferently, "The Eternal Heavenly Book is the upper part, and the Heaven Punishing Formation is the lower part. Even if you deny it, I have already confirmed that the Heaven Punishing Formation is in your hands. Since you have already obtained the Heaven Punishing Formation, why would you care about the Eternal Heavenly Book? After all, no matter how unfathomable the Eternal Heavenly Book is, it can't be compared to the Heaven Punishing Formation." At this point she paused and looked sideways at Yun Yao and Ji Ku, who were cultivating under the blood flame sacred tree. "Therefore you asked me about the Eternal Heavenly Book because you want to help your two wives break through to the God Emperor realm as soon as possible. After all, the five of us broke through to the God Emperor realm by comprehending the Eternal Heavenly Book." Although the Prajna God Emperor had exposed him, Ji Tianxing did not feel embarrassed. He nodded slightly and said, "With your intelligence it's not difficult for you to guess this. Yes, I am interested in studying the Eternal Heavenly Book, but it's not that urgent. The reason why I came to you is to help them break through to the God Emperor realm." The Prajna God Emperor was still expressionless. He said coldly, "The Eternal Heavenly Scripture is my greatest trump card, just like the Heaven Extermination Formation is your greatest trump card. Although we are allies and partners, I have no obligation to tell you the contents of the Eternal Heavenly Tome. Unless you can take out something of equivalent value or offer an equivalent condition, I refuse to cooperate in this matter." Clearly, the Prajna God Emperor was not willing to take out his final trump card and support to help Ji Tianxing for no reason. Ji Tianxing was not angry. With a gentle expression he persuaded, "Perhaps in your opinion? You had no choice. He was threatened by me and forced to form an alliance with me. But in fact I've already treated you as a friend. Otherwise, how could Xianxia have been able to cultivate until now and even recover her divine body? How did you get here? Cultivate with my family and friends?" Prajna God Emperor could not deny these things. She did not dare to look straight into Ji Tianxing's sincere eyes. She was afraid that she would agree in a moment of weakness. She tilted her head slightly and looked at the distorted space in the distance. With an indifferent expression she said, "I'm no longer the naive and childish girl from back then. I won't be moved by your goodwill. You're moved by a little bit of kindness. Let's talk about conditions." Ji Tianxing had already made up his mind to gain something without risking anything. There was no way he would talk about conditions with her. After all, he could not take out any conditions that could make an equivalent exchange with the Prajna God Emperor. Something that could be equivalent to the Eternal Heavenly Scripture could only be the Heaven Extermination Formation. But could he share the Heaven Extermination divine art with his wife and children? But he could not give it to the Prajna God Emperor. So, he raised his eyebrows and made a somewhat shameless decision. He looked at the Prajna God Emperor with a gentle gaze. He slowly reached out his hands and cupped the Prajna God Emperor's cheeks. He turned the Prajna God Emperor to look at him. The Prajna God Emperor did not expect such an intimate action. He was stunned on the spot. Her body stiffened as she sat on the spot. Her eyes widened as she stared at Ji Tianxing. She even forgot to resist. Whether it was more than 1,000 years ago or now since the day she met Kenshin, the two of them had never had such intimate contact. Even if Ji Tianxing only cupped her cheeks with both hands and did nothing else. But this was beyond her expectations and imagination. Her breathing and heart stopped as if she had been petrified. Ji Tianxing's expression did not change. His expression was still gentle as he said, "I don't want to threaten you anymore. But you and I both know that on this planet of origin, you have no one to rely on other than me. The Azura God Emperor has fallen. Your alliance with the other 3 God Emperors has long been in name only. And among the 4 temples, the Kongming Temple and Shangqing Temple have been tricked. You can't rely on them. The other 2 temples also have other god emperors in contact with them. You have no chance. Ji Tianxing moved the Prajna god emperor with emotion and reason. He analyzed her situation thoroughly. But the Prajna god emperor did not listen to a single word. She just stared blankly at Ji Tianxing. Her mind was blank. Her body stiffened and her cheeks uncontrollably turned red. Even if she was a peerless goddess, a supreme being, a god emperor, the softest part of her heart was like that of a young girl. Their fragile defense line was broken just like that. Let go of me. When Ji Tianxing finished analyzing her situation, she finally sobered up. She hurriedly lowered her voice and shouted in a cold tone. She was embarrassed and angry, but there was still some excitement in the depths of her heart. However, she could only pretend to be cold on the surface. Ji Tianxing turned a deaf ear to her words. He still held her face and continued, I can make friends with the beasts on land, and I can also get closer to the sea beasts in the Chaos Sea. I can even rely on any temple to control power and ask for what I want. But you know very well that that's not my best choice. Among so many temples and god emperor powerhouses, you are the only one I can trust. Therefore we should be honest with each other. The Prajna god emperor looked cold on the surface, but in fact she was embarrassed and anxious. She glanced at the other side of the blood-flame sacred tree from time to time, afraid that Yun Yao, Jiku and the others would see her. She was like a guilty thief. Under such circumstances she did not have the mood to listen to Ji Tianxing's heartfelt words. She could only lower her voice and shout coldly, Let go of me. Your wife, children and friends are all here. Aren't you afraid that they will see you? In fact, she had also thought of struggling to break free from Ji Tianxing's palms. However, the 2 of them were both god emperor. If they really fought, there would definitely be strong divine power fluctuations. It would be easier to alarm Yun Yao, Jiku and the others. There was another reason that she could not say. This was actually the first time she had felt the temperature of Kenshin's palm. No matter how much she resisted on the surface, the trace of obsession in the depths of her soul still had some attachment and dependence. She even felt gratified and excited. This was probably what they often said, your mouth says no, but your body is very honest. Chapter 46-53. Not only did Ji Tianxing analyze Pan Ruo God Emperor's situation, but he also tried to persuade her earnestly. This was the so-called moving with emotion and reasoning. But Pan Ruo God Emperor was full of anxiety and guilt. How could she listen? The conversation between the 2 of them was also evasive. You talk about your own things and I talk about mine. However, the 2 of them had very different attitudes. Pan Ruo God Emperor was ashamed and angry, anxious and guilty. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was calm and composed as if victory was within his grasp. Even his appearance, as if he had Pan Ruo God Emperor in his grasp, was somewhat shameless and tyrannical. Seeing that Pan Ruo God Emperor was still unwilling to agree under such circumstances, he could only continue, Pan Ruo, I presume you also have confidence in me. I am the one chosen by the heavens. In the future, there is an extremely high possibility that I will open the door to the heavens and solve the mystery of eternal life. I can guarantee you that when the time comes, I will not take the mystery of eternal life for myself. I will definitely share it with my family and with you and help you obtain eternal life. How about it? This is the condition I'm offering. In reality, if Pan Ruo God Emperor was in a rational and calm state, she definitely would not agree to such an absurd condition. What kind of condition was this? You want to exchange it for the secret of the eternal heavenly book with an empty promise? Keep on dreaming. But Pan Ruo God Emperor was ashamed and angry. She was already powerless to resist. She could only lower her voice and reply urgently, Okay, I believe you. I promise you. Quickly let me go. Why are you so straightforward? This time it was Ji Tianxing's turn to be stunned. Pan Ruo God Emperor was not so easy to talk to just now. Why did she suddenly agree and in such a hurry? He subconsciously glanced back and only then did he realize where the problem lay. Yun Yao, Jiku, Ji Wuhan, Ji Wushuang and the others did not move at all. They were still focused on cultivating in seclusion. Among the crowd, there was only one person who had a slight change in his cultivation posture. That was Yank. This fellow had been cultivating. At first glance, his hands were placed flat on his knees, and his 3 fingers were slightly curled. There was nothing unusual about him. However, Ji Tianxing could see that there was a slight change in the way he circulated his energy and cultivated. Previously, his thumb and index finger were clasped together, but now they were separated. This proved that Yang's cultivation had been interrupted, and he had changed his hand gestures and movements. No wonder Hanya agreed so quickly. It turns out that she sensed Yang's movements and was afraid of being discovered. Ji Tianxing immediately understood the reason and couldn't help but reveal a mocking smile. At this time, the Prajna God Emperor had already raised his arms to block Ji Tianxing's palms, and hurriedly retreated 3 steps back to maintain a certain distance from him. Even so, this was still not enough. Her face was frosty and she glared at Ji Tianxing with a face full of shame and anger. Seeing that her anger had yet to subside, and the blush on her beautiful cheeks had yet to recede, Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "Calm down first. In a while, just write down everything you know about the eternal heavenly book and give it to me." The Prajna God Emperor wrinkled her willowy brows and cursed in a low voice, unable to calm down, "You're shameless. You're taking advantage of people's difficulties. I really don't dare believe that you would do such a thing. How did you become like this?" In her heart and understanding, Kenshin had always been a cold and arrogant gentleman, the world's #1 expert in the way of the sword, a male god whom she admired and respected. But the reborn Kenshin not only married and had children, he also knew how to use all kinds of schemes. The most infuriating thing was that he actually used such shameless methods to force her to submit. It was too subversive. Looking at the vigilant Prajna God Emperor with a cold expression, Ji Tianxing spread his hands and said with an innocent face, "I only spoke a few words that came from the bottom of my heart. How is that shameless? How is that taking advantage of other people's difficulties? You speak as if something happened between the 2 of us. Don't accuse me wrongly, I haven't done anything yet." The Prajna God Emperor was once again stupefied, as if she had been petrified. She looked at Ji Tianxing in disbelief. She simply couldn't believe that such ambiguous and shameless words actually came from the mouth of the other party. These words were too frivolous. How could he say such words to a pure and flawless woman? The Prajna God Emperor was very angry. She bit her lips and glared at Ji Tianxing with a cold expression. Her hands couldn't help but tremble. Seeing her so angry, Ji Tianxing didn't continue to provoke her. He changed the topic and explained in a gentle tone, "Don't misunderstand, I don't have any other intentions. I just treat you as a friend." The Prajna God Emperor coldly snorted and asked in return, "Then when you treat other friends, will you also flatter and do that?" "Of course." Ji Tianxing nodded without hesitation and said in a serious tone, "Those who can cultivate here are all my family and friends. They are all worthy of my trust, the kind that I can entrust my life to. Everyone's actions are a bit more intimate, a sign of mutual concern and trust." The Prajna God Emperor looked around and looked at the experts around the sacred tree. She was still skeptical. "Humph, I don't believe you unless you prove it to me." The topic was changed, and the Prajna God Emperor's shame and anger were greatly reduced. Ji Tianxing was a bit embarrassed. "How can I prove it? Everyone is cultivating in seclusion, I can't disturb them." "No. I saw it just now, that big guy has already finished his cultivation." The Prajna God Emperor's attitude was very stubborn, and she even pointed at Yank not far away. Yank, who was sitting cross-legged on the floating platform, seemed to be cultivating with his eyes closed, but for some reason his fingers suddenly trembled twice. Ji Tianxing glanced at Yank, then turned back to the Prajna God Emperor and smiled bitterly. "That's a friend who has followed me for many years, risking his life for me many times. Do I still need to prove it? That's why I can prove that you weren't lying just now." The Prajna God Emperor said expressionlessly, as if saying that if you don't prove it to me, then you're lying. Ji Tianxing was very helpless, but he could only get up and leave, flying towards Yank. Sitting on the floating platform and cultivating, Yank's eyelids began to twitch and his back began to sweat. But he still didn't move, closing his eyes and pretending to cultivate. It was very difficult to endure. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing flew in front of Yank, looking at his huge body that was several zhang tall, like a pile of rocks, and couldn't help but feel a headache. But the Prajna God Emperor was watching from not far away, so he could only continue to act. Yank, how's your cultivation going? Ji Tianxing calmly woke Yank up, expressing his concern with a concerned tone. Yanku also stopped his cultivation and pretended that he had been awakened. After that, Ji Tianxing asked him a few questions and he answered them all in a well-behaved manner. But he was very nervous and couldn't help but transmit his voice to Ji Tianxing. Young master, I really didn't see anything. Don't worry, I won't tell the two matriarchs. Ji Tianxing couldn't help but roll his eyes and transmitted his voice back. Since you don't know anything, what are you going to tell them? Chapter 46-54. Yanku was stunned. He immediately realized that he had said something wrong. His eyes were filled with regret and he wished he could give himself 2 slaps. Seeing that he was anxious and wanted to explain further, Ji Tianxing was also afraid that he would make things worse, so he hurriedly sent a voice transmission to stop him. Shut up. You've been cultivating in seclusion. You don't know anything. Do you understand? Yank pursed his lips and didn't dare to say anything. He just nodded. His simple and honest appearance was comical, causing Pan-Re-Emperor God, who was not far away, to reveal a smile in his eyes. In fact, she had seen through Yank's disguise and guessed that Yank and Ji Tianxing were secretly communicating. The master and servant were putting on an act, but because of Yank's honesty they looked funny. Ji Tianxing encouraged Yank a little more and patted Yank's broad shoulder. He was about to turn and leave. At this time the Prajna God Emperor said to him, patting the shoulder, and that's it? You weren't like that just now. Ji Tianxing, who was about to leave, suddenly froze. He could only smile bitterly in his heart. Damn Prajna. She must have done it on purpose. With that thought, Ji Tianxing looked at Yank's big head and wide cheeks. He looked at his own palm and couldn't bring himself to do it. Yank was also sweating. He looked at him in fear and his eyes were full of pleading. Oh my God. That scene was chilling just thinking about it. But the Prajna God Emperor was eyeing covetously. Ji Tianxing could only grit his teeth. His hands lit up with golden light and condensed into a pair of millstone-sized palms. He slowly reached out to Yank's face. At this moment Ji Tianxing's heart was in agony. He wanted to cry but had no tears. Yank was so frightened that he wanted to run away. His eyes were full of despair. Bang! Bang! Fortunately Ji Tianxing was quick-witted. He didn't lift Yank's face with his golden palms. Instead he patted his face. The golden palm collided with Yank's huge face, producing a few muffled sounds. Yank, cultivate well and strive to reach the peak of the God King realm as soon as possible. Ji Tianxing said this with a smile, expressing his encouragement to Yank. Yank could only try to squeeze out a smile that was uglier than crying and nodded hard. Ji Tianxing quickly retracted his palms and turned to leave without looking back. Now that he had completed his mission and verified his words with the Prajna God Emperor, he secretly let out a sigh of relief. Poor Yank too looked relieved. He quickly raised his arm to wipe his sweat. When Ji Tianxing returned to the Prajna God Emperor's side, he discovered that the Prajna God Emperor's anger had completely disappeared. She was pursing her lips, suppressing her laughter as she looked at him with a mocking gaze. The anger, embarrassment from before had all vanished. Ji Tianxing knew that she was doing it on purpose. He glared at her and snorted. Are you satisfied now? Do you believe me? Seeing him finally admit defeat and look wronged, the Prajna God Emperor was in a good mood. She couldn't help but laugh. You reap what you sow. Who told you to bully me? This was the first time Ji Tianxing had seen the Prajna God Emperor smile since his rebirth. Just like before, her smile was as pure and flawless as a flower. The two of them fell into silence and did not speak. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was a little absent-minded, as if he had recalled some memories, the Prajna God Emperor quickly retracted her smile. She returned to her cold and aloof attitude. All right, let's end this matter here. I'll give you what you want in a moment. With that, the Prajna God Emperor took out a jade slip and began to record the contents of the eternal heavenly scripture into it. Ji Tianxing also returned to normal. He stood on the floating platform with his hands behind his back and waited quietly. Not long after, the Prajna God Emperor recorded the contents of the eternal heavenly scripture and handed it to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing received the jade slip and read its contents with his divine sense. Moments later he retracted his divine sense and frowned. Why is it only 600 words? The contents aren't complete? The contents of the eternal heavenly scripture that the Prajna God Emperor knew were different from the Asura God Emperors, but they were both around 600 words long and profound. In response to Ji Tianxing's doubts, the Prajna God Emperor explained, when we obtained the eternal heavenly scripture, there was also an internal conflict. Netherworld, Asura, Lu Jiyang, and the others all wanted to keep the eternal heavenly scripture for everyone, but in reality they wanted to keep it for themselves. However, after many years of competition and deadlock, everyone finally decided to divide the 3,000 words of the eternal heavenly scripture into 5 portions, one for each person. If we cultivated only one portion and were unable to break through to the God Emperor realm, we could exchange and obtain new portions. However, later on we cultivated only 600 words of content and broke through to the God Emperor realm one after another. Thus we didn't exchange. Everyone kept their secrets and kept the contents that belonged to them. After hearing the Prajna God Emperor's explanation, Ji Tianxing finally understood. So that's how it is. From this, it could be seen that the alliance between the 5 God Emperors had been very weak from the beginning. After all, the stronger God Emperors all had their own selfish motives. Since 600 words of content can help people break through to the God Emperor realm, then I've obtained 2 portions. They should be able to help Yao Yao and Cuckoo. With this thought in mind, Ji Tianxing put away the jade slips and thanked the Prajna God Emperor. Then he recorded the 600 words of the heavenly scripture in the Asura God Emperor's memory on 2 jade slips. You probably haven't seen the contents of the heavenly scripture that the Asura God Emperor obtained. I'll leave one for you. You can study it. Might be helpful. Ji Tianxing took out a jade slip and gave it to the Prajna God Emperor before turning to leave. The Prajna God Emperor didn't say much. He took the jade slip and watched him leave before continuing to cultivate. Ji Tianxing didn't waste any time. He took the jade slips and went to find Yun Yao and Ji Ku. He woke up Yun Yao and Ji Ku, who were cultivating in seclusion, and handed the 2 jade slips to them. When Yun Yao and Ji Ku learned that the jade slips recorded the contents of the eternal heavenly scripture, they treated it very seriously and treated it like a treasure. The 2 of them cultivated the contents of the heavenly scripture of 600 words respectively. They carefully comprehended and thought about it, determined to break through to the God Emperor realm. After the 2 of them cultivated in seclusion, Ji Tianxing also continued to cultivate in seclusion. Just like that, more than 200 years passed in the distorted space-time. Yun Yao was the first to break through the limits of the Divine King realm and began to break through to the God Emperor realm. However, she failed 3 times. The reason was that the divine power in the distorted spacetime was not enough. Moreover, the grade of the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda was not high enough. If she forcefully broke through to the God Emperor realm in the distorted spacetime, the huge shockwave would also damage the internal structure of the divine pagoda. Hence, Yun Yao left the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and appeared in the rock wall of the dark trench. Ji Tianxing had long dug out a cave with a radius of 100 feet on the extremely hard rock wall. It was also protected and covered by a Theark-level array formation. Yun Yao continued to cultivate in the cave. She could clearly sense that there was endless divine power of heaven and earth surging over from all directions. The divine power at the bottom of the chaotic sea was far denser than the distorted spacetime. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.